The ugly monster suddenly turned into Li Xiaoao's aunt as she swung a wok at his face. Everyone froze, surprised by the sharp change. Then, they all burst out in hysterical laughter. Ha ha ha! Sir, is this a comedy game? Is the main character here to be funny? Is he really a sword cultivator? And Cheng laughed non-stop. With the celestial sword, you can go to the heavens and enter the netherworld. But you are being hit by a wok at the hostel, sleeping until the day is almost over. Look, Auntie is telling him to stop daydreaming. Shen Qingqing and the others couldn't help but chuckle. If this is a comedy, I admit that it succeeded in making me laugh. Lin Xiao laughed upon hearing the others make fun of him. Fang Qi face twitched as he climbed up from his bed. Of course, his audience had no idea what was waiting for them in the future. These people had never experienced the legend of the sword and fairy before, and they would definitely become addicted to the game. However, Fang Qi was also surprised that the game would start in such a humorous manner. Exactly. Wu Yangcheng chimed in, at least the main character of Celestial Warrior is extremely talented and from a prestigious family. The main character in this game is just a waiter. How talented can a waiter be? He's never going to become a cultivator nor a warrior. Buletinche analyzed. At most, he can fight off hooligans on the streets. Fang Qi slapped his forehead and thought to himself, they probably never even heard of normal or even untalented people cultivating. After getting off his bed, Fang Qi listened to Auntie Li and went downstairs to tend to customers. He had to admit that the virtual reality version of the game was extremely lifelike. He enjoyed himself even if there was no one watching. The system's virtual reality remake gave the player a lot of freedom to explore the game. However, many events would happen during this game, just like the original. For example, as soon as Fang Qi walked up, he saw a drunken deist passed out in front of the hostel. Right now, the character, Li Xiaoao, was only an ordinary young man who didn't have any power. Therefore, even though Fang Qi had the freedom to move around, he did all the missions patiently and progressed the plot. He had to learn the sword control technique first. Soon, it was time to go to the sea. Li Xiaoao had never met his parents and was raised by his auntie. She suddenly became sick one day, and none of the doctors on their island could cure her, forcing Li Xiaoao to look for medicine on the celestial spiritual island. That was where the entire story began. Standing on a ship, Fang Qi looked at the ocean that seemed endless, and the waves splashed in rage. It was getting late, but the winds and waves weren't calming down at all. At this point, Li Xiaoao was no more than an ordinary young man who worked as a waiter. He had never cultivated, he only knew how to street fight. Without energy or warrior qi, he was an ordinary young man who risked his life to go to the sea. When the others saw how determined Li Xiaoao was, they couldn't help but feel a sense of respect toward this funny young man. They wouldn't feel that way if he was a powerful cultivator. However, he was an ordinary young man, and that was why they were shocked by his actions. The crowd couldn't help but keep watching, they wanted to know what was going to happen to this ordinary person. Was he going to die in the sea or escape from death and arrive on that so-called celestial spiritual island without knowing what was going to happen to him? They watched intently in anticipation. When they saw that not only did Li Xiaoao not die on celestial spiritual island but also married an extremely beautiful woman. Of course, the more mature scenes were jumped over, and it was the next day. I'm so jealous. The crowd clenched their teeth. They were all more talented than Li Xiaoao, but their lives sucked compared to his. Ling is so pretty. Lin Xiao drooled. Damn. I want a wife now. And Cheng was on the verge of tears. No matter who you marry, she's not going to be prettier than Ling. Buletinche interjected. And Cheng's face twitched as he felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Sir, I want to play this game. Wu Yangcheng decided. And Cheng, Song Qingfeng and the other young men were so immersed in the game that they couldn't even take their eyes off Fang Qi's screen. Shut up! Li Haoran interrupted, "Your playtime for today is up, just watch the owner play." "But, Li Xiaoao doesn't have warrior qi nor essence, he's so weak." Shen Qingqing sighed. Just then, they watched Li Xiaoao, who was controlled by Fang Qi, run out in the middle of the night. They were confused. "Wait! Sir, why are you running out at this hour?" "I think that poor Daoist said he's going to teach Li Xiaoao sword techniques at night." Shen Qingqing was one of the few people who remembered this detail. "What can a poor Daoist teach him?" Nalan Hongyu finally said in disdain. "Is Li Xiaoao's master that poor Daoist?" The crowd was bewildered. Wu Yangcheng, who just declared that he was going to play, suddenly stopped what he was doing. For him, asking a poor Daoist to be his master was so degrading. That Daoist didn't even have money to pay for liquor and food, and he had to ask the poor Li Xiaoao for money. In this world, those with powers were of extremely high status. For example, Nalan Hongyu enlisted into the army when he became an ancestral warrior and wasn't discharged until the establishment of Dajin. His current power came from countless dangerous battles. He spent more than 100 years in the military to get to where he was today. Therefore, how could he ever ask a beggar like Daoist to be his master? If it weren't for the amazing sword control technique in the beginning that piqued his interest, he would have left a long time ago. As the crowd was chatting, Fang Qi arrived on the Sansan temple on the hill. TL notes, Sansan are local mountain gods in Eastern legends. "Look, the Daoist really is teaching him sword techniques." As the others complained, Su Zixin suddenly shrieked as she pointed at Fang Qi's screen. "Look carefully, I'm only going to teach you this once." Then, the Daoist landed outside the Sansan temple in a heartbeat. By the time Li Xiaoao followed him out, the Daoist chanted and unsheathed his sword. "Look at this sword technique." They found his actions familiar and even terrifying. Isn't this the sword technique that Li Xiaoao dreamed of? It was the sword control technique. Wasn't that just a dream? The moon shined brightly, and powerful sword energy flew under the night sky, shaking heaven and earth. They had never seen or even heard of a technique like this. Most importantly, the sword energies and sword control technique merged into one. Does this poor Daoist practice both spiritual spells and martial arts? Moreover, he is extremely skilled in both. After he demonstrated the first set of sword techniques, the Daoist left on his sword. On the screen was a poem he left behind. "The imperial sword arrives with the wind, eliminating evil from heaven and earth. I will be thrilled if I have liquor, but I'm still insane when I don't. I will drink the lakes and rivers and then swallow the sun and moon. I am the liquor sword immortal, the only person who is left standing after 1,000 drinks." The crowd fell silent. The sword immortal exists? The sword control technique from Li Xiaoao's dream exists as well? I am the liquor sword immortal, the only person who is left standing after 1,000 drinks? Liquor sword immortal. The crowd thought back at how they were just looking down at this Daoist, but he was really the liquor sword immortal? Moreover, he really knew the sword control technique? Nalan Hongyu bellowed, "Does anyone have a sword? Get me a sword." Warriors were indeed powerful enough to cut through rivers and mountains, but no one thought that flying on a sword was possible. If it were, even Nalan Mingxiu, who was usually calm and collected, couldn't hide the excitement from her expression. Knowing the sword control technique would change their lives. Even though they were relatively weak, they also dreamed of flying in the sky and enjoying the gloriousness of the heavens and earth. Nalan Hongyu's attention was on the sword immortal's sword technique, it was so subtle and exquisite. Upon hearing Nalan Hongyu's request, Nalan Mingxiu immediately handed him a sword. He placed the sword in his hand and slowly tried to mimic the sword immortal's techniques. Then, Nalan Hongyu's sword suddenly jumped, and so did the crowd's eyelids. "Let me watch it again, I need to see the sword control technique again. Didn't you say you weren't interested in this game, and that poor Daoist wouldn't be able to teach you anything good?" Fang Qi expression remained unchanging as he asked the crowd while practicing the sword control technique through Li Xiaoao. No one in the crowd made a noise, they were so embarrassed that they felt like crawling into the ground and never climbing out. Why does he have to mention that? Just as the crowd was enjoying themselves, Fang Qi said that he was closing the shop again, making the crowd wail unhappily. While An Cheng watched Fang Qi lock the doors and wave at him, he shouted, "I really want to smash this shop apart." "Go ahead." Yang Cheng laughed as he gestured. An Cheng's face twitched. "Forget it, I'll come back tomorrow." "Miss Nalan, I wish we get to watch a little longer," Lan Yan complained as she walked. "Stupid owner keeps closing his shop." Nalan Mingxiu nodded. "Let's come earlier tomorrow. The imperial sword arrives with the wind, eliminating evil from heaven and earth. I will be thrilled if I have liquor, but I'm still insane when I don't. I will drink the lakes and rivers and then swallow the sun and moon. I am the liquor sword immortal, the only person who is left standing after 1,000 drinks." Outside the internet cafe, someone pretended to be the liquor sword immortal, tilting his head side to side and reciting this poem as if he were a sage. "The game's amazing." Although Fang Qi closed his shop, and they already left, Song Qingfeng and the others couldn't suppress their excitement and shouted aloud. "Who is this liquor sword immortal? He's so powerful." They couldn't help but discuss amongst themselves. "Why won't the owner let us watch any more?" Lin Xiao waved his fist in the air, "The swords can fly." Su Luo chimed in, "Let's try on our own tomorrow." Li Xiaoao was flying in his dream, remember? Everyone was kicked out of the internet cafe at the same time, so it was noisy outside on the streets. Shen Qingqing had a great temper, so she changed the topic. "Let's learn the sword control technique together. Once we learn it, we can go and fly." "You're right." Lan Yan shouted happily, "Once we all learn the technique, we'll fly out of the city together and have fun." "Me too." Ye Xiao immediately joined the party. With her essence, she couldn't steer spiritual boats. Moreover, flying on a sword was so much freer than taking a boat. "Me too. Count me in." Of course, some people like An Cheng were worried. "Do you think it'll be more dangerous for cultivators to encounter warriors who know the sword control technique in the future?" "Probably not." An Hui shook his head. "Although warriors can practice this technique, it will be hard for them to gain good control. If they can't control the swords properly, they are no more than a giant target in the air. Plus, cultivators will do better than warriors. In the future, we will be able to alternate between the spiritual boats and swords. We can switch to the other method of flying when there is danger, and we can ensure our combat skills. It's an amazing technique to learn." And Hui was positive that the delicate control of spiritual energy that had taken cultivators centuries to perfect wasn't something warriors could compare to. "You're right, Uncle An," Yang Cheng and the others' expressions lit up upon hearing this. "Should we?" They glanced at each other. "Come learn sword control techniques tomorrow morning." "Us too," another group of people shouted. "But, the owner's not going to open his shop until 8 a.m. tomorrow, right?" Someone immediately complained, "We've got to wait for 8 more hours, can we think of a way to get the owner open his shop earlier?" The group left while brainstorming. No one slept that night. Song Qingfeng and the others, who were used to the shop opening at 8 a.m., arrived outside Fang Qi Internet Cafe with dark circles under their eyes. It wasn't even 5 a.m. yet. The time, Lin Xiao glanced at the closed doors dejectedly. "Aren't we a little too early?" Shen Qingqing yawned and appeared on the street. Then, she immediately saw Song Qingfeng and the others and said, "You're so early." Although they made plans to come early, wasn't this a little too early? "Of course we came early, none of us could sleep." Song Qingfeng complained. The thought of learning the sword control technique and being able to fly made them so excited that they felt like sleeping was a waste of time. Today, An Huawei, An Cheng, and the others came early as well, much earlier than they had ever been. We may be here early, but the shop isn't open yet. An Cheng led the group and said in doubt, if the owner doesn't open his shop, then we are early for nothing. Before he could say anything else, he saw a large group of people standing outside the internet cafe. An Cheng's face twitched. Why are you all so early? We want to learn the sword control technique in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Song Qingfeng replied, didn't we say we're going to come early? An Cheng thought he was early enough. I didn't know this is what you meant by early. But the problem is, how can we get in? Ouyang Cheng pointed at the locked doors. There's no way the owner would open the shop right now. Nalan Mingxiu came early as well and analyzed calmly. Why are you here then? We can try to wake him up, she replied. Perhaps they could ask Fang Qi to open the shop at 7 am, but it was 5 am right now. They looked at each other grimly and felt a little nervous. Do any of you have a better idea? Nalan Mingxiu asked upon seeing their hesitation, and the rest of the group shook their heads. Are we really going to wake him up? Song Qingfeng was nervous since it was so early in the morning. If we don't wake him up, we'll have to wait here for at least 2 more hours. Lin Xiao touched his neck, feeling the chilliness of the morning. Upon hearing this, everyone looked awkward. They could either stand here for 2 hours or call Fang Qi right now. They all knew what they wanted to do. Who's going to call him? They glanced at each other. Together. Lan Yan took out a round, pearl-like spiritual artifact and said, this is a sound-conducting pearl, it can gather our voices and send it to the owner's bedroom. The others hesitated. Should we really do that? Of course we should. An Cheng suddenly laughed, it's a great idea, and we aren't violating any of the rules of the internet cafe. It's not like the owner will kick us out and never let us come back because of this. Upon hearing this, Ouyang Cheng's expression lit up. The best thing about the owner is that he goes by the rules. We aren't breaking any rules, so what can he do? You have a point, the others felt enlightened. The sky was just lighting up, and Fang Qi was still soundly asleep. Suddenly, loud voices sounded beside him, scaring him out of his bed. Then, he heard loud shouts. Sir, open up! Upon hearing this, he almost fell out of his bed. Damn it, what the F***ck is going on? Still in his pajamas, Fang Qi opened his window with a dark expression on his face. He saw a bunch of people standing downstairs, and a weird pearl hovered before them. Even though they were shouting from downstairs, their voices blasted upstairs as if they were using a loudspeaker, waking Fang Qi right up. He looked at the dark sky and then at the time, it was 5:30 am. F***ck, he cursed angrily. To them, Diablo was fun, and the skills inside were indeed powerful. However, the most important thing right now was learning the sword control technique. As for Diablo, some had already passed Act 2, and those who didn't were close. Without Act 3, they weren't in a hurry anymore. Fang Qi was at a loss for words. Auntie Wang's bun shop wasn't even open yet, so Fang Qi had no choice but to take out a container of Häagen-Dazs from the freezer. He took a bite and enjoyed the rich milk and vanilla flavor bursting in his mouth. Enjoying a delicacy at the moment was delightful despite the current rough circumstances. Aside from the avid fans of Legend of the Sword and Fairy, no one else would come at this hour. Fang Qi sat in the booth for about an hour before seeing Nalan Hongguo walk in. He was here to learn the sword control technique as well. There are so many people here. After glancing around the shop, Nalan Hongguo froze for a second. Then, realizing that the others were already playing the game, he quickly picked a computer and sat down. The imperial sword arrives with the wind, eliminating evil from heaven and earth. I will be thrilled if I have liquor, but I'm still insane when I don't, someone shouted before Nalan Hongguo could click open the game. Someone else immediately finished the poem. I will drink the lakes and rivers and then swallow the sun and moon. I am the liquor sword immortal, the only person who is left standing after 1,000 drinks. Fang Qi ate his ice cream as he shouted back at them, if you're going to recite poems, turn off the external communication option. I'm going to turn off the computers of the people who shout again. The customers didn't care about his first few sentences. But after hearing Fang Qi last sentence, the two people who were just reciting the poem immediately turned off the external communication option. Then, they mimicked the liquor sword immortal and continued reciting the poem, enjoying themselves immensely. Fang Qi contacted the two shops right across from his current shop yesterday, and he was going to buy them. However, he still needed a couple days to tie up the loose ends. The good thing was that even though he was getting more customers, his internet cafe was still just big enough to host them, no one needed to stand in a line like they used to. Therefore, Fang Qi wasn't in too much of a hurry. He played until 8 a.m., the official opening time of his shop. Right on the dot, Ye Songtao and the disciples of Cloud Ocean faction arrived in Zhuhua City on a flying spiritual boat. Then, they got onto a cart and headed for Origin's Internet Club. When they arrived outside the Internet Cafe, they didn't hear people yelling and screaming like they always did. Ye Songtao glanced around the Internet Cafe and realized that everyone was playing quietly in front of their own computers. What's going on today? Why isn't anyone talking to each other? No one's watching others play. As soon as Ye Songtao walked in, he saw his daughter, Ye Xiao, playing an ancient-looking game that was obviously not Diablo. What are you playing? Ye Songtao walked over unhappily. We were going to come together today. Why did you leave by yourself? Because I like studying. Ye Xiao stared at the screen as she waved her sword. Upon hearing this, Ye Songtao's face twitched and thought, the only thing you do every day is play, and now you're telling me you like studying. He looked at his daughter as if she treated him like an idiot and said with a grim expression on his face, what are you studying? Sword control technique. Ye Xiao was obviously annoyed by her dad's interruption. Go away, Dad. I need to keep studying. I'm going to become a sword immortal. Ye Songtao was at a loss for words. Yesterday, her daughter was learning how to use frozen armor wholeheartedly, but she was learning the sword control technique today? Why can't you learn proper skills? Before Ye Songtao could finish his sentence, he looked up at Ye Xiao's screen and saw the main character jumping off the cliff. What is that? Ye Songtao was dumbfounded as he watched the main character land on a sword and fly into the sky. I spent years learning how to steer the spiritual boat, but you can fly into the sky with a wave of your sword? When did something like this appear? Ye Songtao's eyes were opened as wide as marbles. What is that? A new class? Yeah, a new class called Sword Immortal. Ye Xiao responded, with a celestial sword, I can go to the heavens and enter the netherworld. I'm in control of my destiny and not fate. Ye Songtao felt like spitting blood. He originally thought that playing games with her daughter would lessen the distance between them, but overnight, he found it hard to talk to her. He didn't even know that a person could fly on a sword. Is this a new game? Could it be that awesome? Then, his eyes landed on the blackboard behind the counter and saw the new game. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 1. Activation fee, 20 crystals. Ye Songtao felt like crying. He just spent 8 crystals on each disciple yesterday to activate Diablo, and now there was a new game that cost 20 crystals? He turned around to look at his disciples and touched his crystal pouch. It's not easy being the faction master. Forget it, I need to see if this game really is legendary. Ye Songtao muttered to himself before shouting, young man, activate the Legend of the Sword and Fairy for me. As for the important business that I need to talk to Fang Qi about, I'll talk to the owner after I play. Ye Songtao thought. After a while, An Hui, Yang Zhen, Nalan Hung Guyu, and the others all stood outside the internet cafe. With swords in their hands, they seemed to be chanting something. No, that's wrong. Nalan Hongyu practiced the sword control technique as he glared at An Huey in disdain. The key of the sword control technique is using qi to control the sword. Like this. Nalan Hongyu waved his fingers, and the sword that was by his side immediately flew out of its scabbard and spun in the air before hovering below his feet. However, when a gentle breeze blew by, Nalan Hongyu's sword began shaking furiously. If he weren't a powerful warrior who could already fly on air using his warrior qi, he would have fallen disgracefully onto the ground. Yesong Tao immediately said, "No, elder. Qi is important in the sword control technique, but there are differences between turbid qi and pure qi. If even the slightest bit of turbid qi is used, the sword is going to fall. After all, pure qi rises and turbid qi falls. The liquor sword immortal must have gathered all the pure qi in his body using a powerful spiritual spell. In order to practice the sword control technique as soon as possible, the players all ran out of the internet cafe to try it out halfway through without playing until their daily 6-hour limit. Since the internet cafe was already busy from noon to the afternoon, now it was packed due to the variety of games. When this group of people went back inside, they realized that there weren't any seats left. Let's wait until this evening. They comforted themselves. We might as well work on the sword control technique a little longer. When it was about 9 p.m., An Cheng and the others finally saw a big group of people walking out. They're leaving. There are seats now. Let's go play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Their faces lit up. Perfect. I'm at a key stage in learning sword control technique. An Cheng said confidently. If I watch it again, I will improve drastically. Ms. Nalan, what do you think? Lan Yan asked happily. I think your sword will be able to fly out of its scabbard soon. If I watch it again, I think I will be able to use sword control technique, Nalan Mingxiu responded casually. That's so fast. The young men gasped upon hearing what Nalan Mingxiu said. They were stunned by her talent. Hey, sir! Why are you locking the doors already? Someone shouted. I still have 2 hours left, it's only 9 p.m. He's locking the doors. The group froze. What is going on? Why is Fang Qi closing his shop so early? Upon hearing this question, Fang Qi yawned and replied, I'm really tired. Since I didn't get enough sleep last night, I'm closing the shop early today. The group was flabbergasted. Hey! Wait! I still have 2 hours left. Lin Xiao immediately banged on the glass doors. I still have 3 hours left. Ouyang Cheng shouted. Young man! I still need to talk to you about something. Yesong Tao suddenly remembered. However, Fang Qi turned off the lights and went upstairs to sleep. F***ck. Groans sounded outside the door. Who suggested calling him in the morning? They looked around with grim expressions on their face, trying to look for the person behind the awful suggestion. Who said the owner can't do anything about it? Someone else growled angrily. Oh! I'm going to go now. Lan Yan laughed awkwardly before attempting to escape the scene with Nalan Mingxiu. An Cheng's face turned red with embarrassment. I didn't get much sleep today either, so I'm going to. Stop right there. Nalan Hongyu's face fell. What did I do to deserve this? I still had 3 hours left. Nalan Mingxiu patted her pretty forehead and groaned, I think we're in trouble. Lan Yan glanced at the enraged Nalan Hongyu and felt like crying, and An Cheng stood there quietly, not sure what to say. You all need to be punished. Yesong Tao, who finally remembered that he still needed to talk to Fang Qi, added furiously. He's right, who woke the owner this morning? Elder Fu looked at the group grimly and questioned. The people who got here early in the morning felt like digging a hole for themselves to jump into. Then, he sat cross-legged on his bed, clearing his mind and practicing the skill of controlling things using his qi. Suddenly, the system gave him a new task, Skills Expert, become proficient with 10 skills in game, 2/10, and master the sword control technique. Task reward, flying on swords, proficient. Task description, you should thank your powerful system. Hey! Fang Qi became excited as he read his new task right until he got to the task description. He almost laughed out loud. System, can you be less showy? His system didn't respond. Fang Qi continued, are you too embarrassed to say anything? The system still didn't respond. However, he had to admit that the system's new task would save him a lot of time. The main character learned things so fast that even Nalan Mingxiu couldn't catch up, let alone him. Who else could remember the basic sword control techniques after watching it just once except Li Xiaoao? The good thing was that killing monsters in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy would increase skills and experience points. Just like Diablo, the players could add points to skills to level them up fast. Therefore, Fang Qi could become proficient or even master skills as long as he had enough skill points and was of a high enough level. In summary, becoming proficient in 10 skills in the game was much easier compared to the real world. Otherwise, Fang Qi wouldn't have already become proficient in 2 skills. Once he obtained his new task, Fang Qi woke up early the next morning. He realized that he had to rely on his games to become powerful. At 7 a.m., he woke up Zhang Xiaoyu and asked her to clean the shop with him. Today, no one dared to come early and wake him up. When the internet cafe opened at 8 a.m., customers walked in one by one. Soon, An Cheng, Ouyang Cheng, and Buletin Che walked in with dark circles under their eyes. Hey, why do you have smoky eye makeup today? Fang Qi asked. Their faces twitched. Yesterday, not only did they not hit their 6-hour time limit, but they were also punished by Nalan Hongguo and the others. However, instead of complaining, they immediately headed to the computers. Soon, Fang Qi saw Song Qingfeng and the others also walk in with dark circles under their eyes. Sir, what do you think is going on with them? Zhang Xiaoyu became confused as well. We didn't get much sleep last night. Song Qingfeng felt awkward since Zhang Xiaoyu stared at him. Fang Qi was too lazy to chat with them, he decided to continue his task. The only 2 skills he was proficient at were his use of daggers and guns in Resident Evil. He spent so much time on them that he probably mastered them rather than just being proficient at them. Fang Qi didn't know how proficient was considered in Diablo, but he assumed that level 10 or above would be fine. He wasn't level 10 in any of them yet, but he believed that once Act 3 was activated, he would quickly become proficient in them. Therefore, all that was left was becoming proficient in the skills listed in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. This game was no longer a turn-based strategy game, since the world of the Legend of the Sword and Fairy was lifelike, allowing more talented players to have more power. Since Fang Qi only began playing the game, he didn't know many techniques. However, he only needed to know the most basic sword control technique to fight enemies. After playing for the day, the plot of the game advanced to the part where Li Xiaoao had to battle on stage to fight for a fiancé. The main character found himself another beautiful fiancé. Ling is a snake demoness. While the guys felt jealous and envious toward Li Xiaoao, they also felt heartbroken for Ling. How could she be a snake demoness? Even if she is, she's a nice demoness, right? A crowd gathered behind Fang Qi to find out the rest of the plot. Although the game focused mainly on cultivators, there were many things that didn't exist in this world. For example, the sword control technique, the liquor sword immortal, and all sorts of new things slowly made the players understand how interesting the game was. The fact that the Legend of the Sword and Fairy was similar to their current world didn't bore the players. Instead, they found it easier to be immersed within the game. It was very different from the Celestial Warrior, and it left them in awe. As a loyal fan of the plots in the games, Shen Qingqing loved this game since she felt like it was telling her a beautiful story that was filled with laughter, disappointment, sweetness, and even sorrow. To her, The Legend of the Sword and Fairy was a colorful painting that connected all the characters and made the players wonder if the characters actually lived somewhere in their world that they were unaware of. Soon, they all had the feeling that the story was happening somewhere in this world. They genuinely believed that a young man named Li Xiaoao was currently traveling to Nanzhao with Ling. As a man who had seen all walks of life, Nalan Hongguo felt like he had returned to his days as a passionate young man who was set to travel the world. The young man in the story, Li Xiaoao, was at the prime of his life, stirring up the memories in Nalan Hongguo's head. If Nalan Hongguo's interest in this game peaked because of the sword control techniques, then it was safe to say that he finally understood how immersive this game was. As the story progressed, the players slowly understood the difference between this game and the others. They weren't the main characters in this game, it was about a young man named Li Xiaoao who existed somewhere in this world. Everything they saw and felt was through his lens and not theirs. However, this didn't stop them from enjoying the game. There were so many aspects of Li Xiaoao's life that enticed and excited them. They followed Li Xiaoao as they experienced everything he did. Their mood swung with the main character's experiences. They worried about him when he was in trouble and cared about Ling when she was willing to sacrifice herself to save Li Xiaoao. They had to admit that watching and playing this game was extremely pleasant. Gradually, not only those who enjoyed watching Fang Qi play stood behind him, even the fans of Resident Evil who rarely interacted with Fang Qi all gathered around him. Chen Yang, a Heaven House disciple of the Ling Yun Academy, came to play Resident Evil under his friend's recommendation. There were a lot of people in the internet cafe, and the 50 or so computers were almost full at all times, meaning that there were as many as 150 players every day. Fang Qi didn't have the time to teach them one by one, so a new player like Cheng Yang learned how to play from his friends and barely interacted with the owner. However, as soon as Chen Yang finished playing today, he saw a group of people huddled behind Fang Qi. Rather than screaming and shouting like they used to, the group was abnormally quiet today. "What are you all watching?" Chen Yang asked, and someone replied casually, "The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. The game that costs 20 crystals." To Chen Yang, Resident Evil was fun enough, so he didn't see the point in using 20 crystals to activate a new game. However, today was different, he had just passed Resident Evil. Therefore, he stopped and decided to see if the game that cost 20 crystals was really worth the hype. "Yang, you're not leaving?" the other disciples from Heaven House asked. They were new players as well and didn't know Fang Qi well either. "No, I'm going to watch this man play the new game for a while." Chen Yang shook his head and replied. Zhang Xiaoyu sat behind the counter in boredom. Usually when she had nothing to do, she would run up to Fang Qi and watch him play. But today, she stared at all the people behind Fang Qi in sadness as if she had been wronged. "I wish I could become taller." She jumped up and down but barely even saw his screen. Girls always took care of their appearances, so Lan Yan and Nalan Mingxiu didn't come until they took a nap. Although they still had dark circles under their eyes, they weren't so obvious. When they walked in, Nalan Mingxiu's face still showed hints of embarrassment. As the most talented genius of the young generation at the Nalan family, she had never been scolded, until last night. There was her first time experiencing all that. "Xiaoyu, are you watching Fang Qi play?" Lan Yan laughed and asked when she saw Zhang Xiaoyu jumping up and down and trying to see the screen. "Come on, get me 2 Häagen-Dazs ice creams, and I'll carry you in my arms." "No, it's too embarrassing." Zhang Xiaoyu refused and turned her head away. "Are you sure?" Lan Yan moved up and continued enticing her, "This game is more exciting than Diablo. You will see the sword control technique, and there is a liquor sword immortal. You'll also see the owner fight all sorts of monsters as long as you let me carry you." "No. I want to see the owner get beaten up by monsters." Zhang Xiaoyu pouted. Lan Yan immediately burst out in laughter and said, "That will happen too." Zhang Xiaoyu pondered as she contemplated, "It does sound really interesting, okay then." Zhang Xiaoyu took the crystals and handed Lan Yan and Nalan Mingxiu each a container of Häagen-Dazs. Then, Lan Yan carried Zhang Xiaoyu in her arms until the latter's eyes saw the screen. Lan Yan was a warrior after all, so carrying a little girl like Zhang Xiaoyu was as easy as carrying a doll. Do you want to try? Lan Yan could even use the other hand to eat ice cream. Please do not share snacks, Fang Qi suddenly said, or else, you will never be welcomed back. Zhang Xiaoyu immediately showed her canine teeth at Fang Qi, but the latter had already turned back to face the screen. Furious, Zhang Xiaoyu waved her fists in the air and said, "He's so annoying." The truth was, the game gave the players a lot of freedom to explore, so Fang Qi really wanted to create the perfect ending. For example, he wanted to stop Ling from being taken up to Shu Mountain by the Sword Sage and avoid the subsequent disasters from happening. After Elder Shi took Ling away, Fang Qi began planning things out and leveling up himself. However, it was obvious that his time was limited. The events that would take place wouldn't be slowed, so he could only change small details with the time he had. Fang Qi couldn't stop Ling from being taken up the Shu Mountain by the Sword Sage. From the viewpoints of the Shu Mountain faction, all monsters and demons were evil. Even if Fang Qi mentioned that Ling was Nuo's descendant and leaked this critical information, Ling would still be locked up until further investigation. As for taking Ling back from the Sword Sage, the crowd stared at the powerful and profound sword energies on the screen, as well as sword techniques that they couldn't comprehend. For the first time, they felt hopeless. "Let me try." Nalan Hongwu rolled up his sleeves and shouted, "How can he be so unreasonable? Let me fight him for 3 days if I have to. Let's see who's more powerful, his sword techniques or my warrior skills." Nalan Hongwu was so angry that he wanted to jump into the screen and battle the Sword Sage. Reasonable. Those who knew Nalan Hongwu's identity were at a loss for words. Who would have thought that one day, Nalan Hongwu would be the reasonable one, they thought. Even though others didn't voice their opinions about the Sword Sage, they also wanted to jump into the screen to help. The only thing was that they knew they weren't as strong as Nalan Hongwu and couldn't defeat the skilled Sword Sage even if they could enter the game. In the end, Fang Qi realized that even though he could change the minor details, changing the entire plot of the story seemed impossible. Upon hearing the reactions behind him, Fang Qi couldn't help but shake his head. Later in the game, there would be a touching story about Lu Jinyuan and the butterfly demoness. Once he finished that story, those watching him were all in their tears. The story was very intricately written. Lu Jinyuan met a butterfly that was stuck inside a spider's web, and he rescued it and set it free. It turned out that the butterfly was a butterfly demoness, and she wanted to repay him. The plot felt like a dream, but everything was so closely linked together that the audience felt like it really happened in the world. They even wished that this story was real. The people in this world hadn't read anything bizarre and interesting, so they felt like this story was amazing. Humans can fall in love with demons? Monsters are better at expressing gratitude? How could something so amazing exist? Fang Qi was left in awe as well. The plot of the legend of the sword and fairy was like a giant hole, those who get into it wouldn't be able to climb out. Why is this demoness so nice? Shen Qingqing was only watching to kill time, but she cried buckets when she saw how Ki, the butterfly demoness, was willing to give up thousands of years of cultivation strength just to give Lu Jinyuan, the human, 10 more years of life. Zhang Xiaoyu hugged onto Lan Yan as she wailed, "Why is Ki so stupid?" Even Nalan Mingxiu's eyes were red, and she mumbled to herself, "How can someone who has cultivated for more than 1,000 years still be so stupid? I would never do anything like that." Not only the girls, even curious new players like Chen Yang and the others choked back tears. "This isn't real, right? Tell me this isn't real. I'm a tough man, how can I cry while watching a story that's happening inside a game?" Chen Yang rubbed his eyes in bewilderment. Then, he suggested loudly, "Let's play this game tomorrow. We watched the owner play for so long, so we basically know their future. Let's try to stop such tragedies from happening." "Yes. I think we can stop these tragedies." Those who haven't played The Legend of the Sword and Fairy declared with determination as they wiped off their tears and waved their fists in the air. Let's play tomorrow and stop the tragedies. Fang Qi sighed, too young, too naive. Nalan Hongwu took a deep breath and forced his tears back into his eyes. I'm glad that I'm used to life and death, or else I would have been embarrassed in front of these young people. The stories in the game are more touching than real life. Those who said that they were sick of stories of this sort were now incredibly embarrassed. After finishing this part of the story, Fang Qi exhaled and glanced at the people around him who were either holding back their tears or sniffling quietly. He sighed sadly and thought, what's going to happen if I can't stop Ling from dying? Congratulations on the new gift. Suddenly, Fang Qi heard the system's notification and quickly opened the system interface. While playing the game, the host attracted the attention of a great number of audience and therefore possesses the popularity of a qualified owner. Thus, the system is rewarding the host with special equipment, live stream screens, X2. Such equipment will be installed when the new shop opens, and live streaming will become available. Because of this, he began anticipating the later stories that would happen in The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. The young people were even more emotional than he was. Even after they left, they were still thinking about all the stories they just saw in the game as if these stories happened right in front of them. Xiaoao was playful but responsible, Yoru was a naive girl who seemed stubborn but was soft-hearted, and Ling was considerate and sweet. Moreover, Lu Jinyuan and the butterfly demoness story touched their hearts. Perhaps they never thought that they would share the happiness and sorrow of characters in a game. The people in the game should be known to all. We need more people to know about them. Chen Yang exclaimed as his expression lit up. Yes. We need more people to know about them. More people. Chen Yang's friends were exhilarated by this idea as they were thinking of the same thing. After going back to Lingyun Academy, Chen Yang gathered some close friends and said, let me tell you. I watched the owner play The Legend of the Sword and Fairy yesterday, The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. That new game. Is it good? It's more than that. Chen Yang answered, the plot and techniques in the game are all classics. In terms of techniques, there are sword control technique, innumerable sword scroll, heavenly sword. If you master the sword control technique, both warriors and cultivators can fly on swords. The plot is amazing too. I've never been more fascinated. It's that good. The crowd was doubtful, it sounds similar to Celestial Warrior. Are you kidding me? Celestial Warrior is boring and can't compare with The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Chen Yang exclaimed, if you don't believe me, watch me play tomorrow. You're going to play? One of his friends asked, sounds good. If it's good, we'll play too. Chen Yang wasn't the only who was spreading the message. Song Qingfeng, Lin Xiao and Su Luo sat together in the Wind and Moon Pavilion along with some of their friends. Countless delicacies were placed on the table, and an occasion of this degree was rare, even for the Wind and Moon Pavilion. Thank you for treating us, Brother Song. What is this for? All the young men present were of prestigious background. However, they were shocked by Song Qingfeng's generosity. Nothing big, Lin Xiao laughed, I'm sure you've all heard of Origin's Internet Club, so I'm not going to explain what it is. Yes. We've heard about it but haven't got the chance to visit. Lin Xiao nodded. We called you all over because we have to share this amazing game with you. Not only at Wind and Moon Pavilion, but players also started to recommend The Legend of the Sword and Fairy to those who were playing other games. Brother Li, we've passed Resident Evil, should we play The Legend of the Sword and Fairy tomorrow? Brother Wang, let me tell you this. I watched the owner play The Legend of the Sword and Fairy, and it is just. Should we change things up tomorrow? Liang Shi was an old Resident Evil player. After his time was up, he looked toward the people who were walking out of the internet cafe while fervently recommending The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Confused, he asked Fang Qi, what kind of magic is in this new game? Fang Qi rubbed his nose and said mysteriously, after all, since they are addicted, others should be as well. Others should be as well. Liang Shi scratched his head, more confused than ever. If you're doubtful, just try it, Fang Qi laughed. Liang Shi didn't know how he should respond. Sir, are you trying to get me addicted as well? Ji Wu lied sideways on the Nanmu bench in the courtyard while a soft breeze gently scuffed the edge of his robe. He was holding 2 white spheres made from stones in one hand, and he rotated and circled them again and again. No one knows where this small shop came from, but prestigious individuals, including those from the Nalan family, Zhuhua City, and even Cloud Ocean faction gather there every day, this man murmured as if he was pondering something. I'm curious as well. How interesting can a game be? A black shadow slowly appeared in the courtyard. Did Nalan Ji change his mind? Nalan Ji? He goes to that shop every day, I don't think we can trust him anymore. Ji Wu snickered, moreover, he's been secretly erasing the traces that could lead to him. Does he really think that I wouldn't find out? I think he probably found another way and is trying to outsmart us. Ji Wu laughed. What do you think, Phantom Wolf? A snicker sounded from the darkness, and the black shadow raised his hand and crossed his neck. Should I? Not yet. Ji Wu stood up from the chair and walked toward the side of the courtyard, which was right above a cliff. Standing here, one could see the entire Jiangnan region. Ji Wu reached out his hand as if he were grasping everything in front of him. However, he quickly let go and said, the Jiangnan region isn't under our control yet. If we kill him, we might burn ourselves. Moreover, he can still be useful to us. Then, the black shadow was waiting for Ji Wu to continue. The old Nalan Hungwu goes to that shop every day, and he isn't a man who can be easily defeated, Ji Wu said faintly, plus, that man is always with him. Perhaps, we can tackle this from another angle. Another angle. The black shadow laughed coldly, that shop messed up our plans, and its business is doing better by the day. Are you really going to let them off the hook? That doesn't sound like you. Of course not, Ji Wu laughed, a civilian shop with such success must have threatened the interest of many other people inside and outside Zhuhua City. Many eyes are watching with jealousy, so all we have to do is watch. The black shadow chuckled, what would you like to do? Ji Wu sat back down in his seat. A butterfly with black wings gently flew before him, and he suddenly reached out to grab its wings. Then, he said nonchalantly, I'm going to ignite the fire. It seems like a good time right now. Those who run too fast will fall for sure. There was more to carving flowers with a sword. The practitioner had to use the sword control technique to carve flowers onto a piece of wood with their sword, and only qi could be used. Also, stepping on water was more than floating on water. People had to use the light foot technique to make themselves as light as a feather so that they can stand on the surface of the water for long periods of time. It was a common technique that allowed people to control their qi. At the same time, the ever-moving surface of the water would act as a simulation of the tossing and swaying one would experience when they were flying on swords. He's using these methods to train his sword control technique. The first thing that Shen Qingqing did every day when she came in was to find out what the owner was doing. Today, she saw Fang Qi character standing on top of a river and not moving. She was shocked by what she saw. Upon hearing Shen Qingqing's gasp, and Cheng who had just walked in also glanced over. He quickly realized what Fang Qi was doing and said, I can't believe that you thought of this. This is targeted training, it's much more effective than standing outside your door and practicing randomly. He's using the swaying waves to improve his control of qi, energy, and his own balance. Nalan Mingxiu glanced over as she ate Haagen-Dazs from the container. In the end, she didn't make fun of Fang Qi. The owner is kind of smart. Of course, as long as Fang Qi didn't say anything, no one would know that he learned these methods from watching anime on Earth. Carving flowers with the sword control technique was different from carving with the sword in hand. It felt like Fang Qi was basically using a metal wire to control the entire sword. Even though he could move the sword by pulling on it, it seemed extremely awkward when the actions were overly deliberate. Fang Qi held a piece of wood in his hands and controlled his sword using his qi to carve the flowers. Slowly, the wood in his hands began showing the shape of flowers. It was a little crooked in the beginning, but as he got more used to controlling the sword this way, the more delicate the shape of the flowers became. In the game, Fang Qi could use his qi to control the sword. Although he couldn't fly on the sword yet, he was advancing quite quickly in the game. The more proficient he got at controlling his sword in the game, the better he could control his qi in the real world. The success of Origin's Internet Club did threaten the interests of others. Most of all, it affected the top entertainment business in Zhuhua City, the Beast Garden. The Beast Garden used to be filled with prestigious individuals, but the place was extremely empty these days. It was obvious that the influential figures in the city were no longer interested in hunting. To most people, hunting was a way to kill time but not a form of real entertainment. The Beast Garden had to feed many monsters and beasts, which cost money and resources to maintain. Without money, this place would quickly collapse. Since the Beast Garden was capable of building such a place for the rich people to have fun, its owner was not ordinary at all. Pang Ruli was powerful and built his estate next to Qin Mountain. The rolling hills looked like the fangs of beasts, making the area more vicious. Sitting inside his mansion, Pang Ruli's bulging muscles made him look like a ferocious beast. Good, good. His thunderous voice sounded in the room as he sat on his chair. Did you find out what's going on? The Beast Garden had been losing customers slowly, but that was manageable. However, he suddenly felt like his Beast Garden at Qin Mountain was quieter than ever overnight. Pang Ruli took out a black jade tobacco pipe that his beautiful concubine lit up for him, and he took a giant puff. Although his establishment was not yet losing money, the trend was worrying. Plus, someone stole his customers from right under his nose. At this thought, he spat out a mouthful of white smoke and said, "When was the last time this happened?" Just then, a maid came in, leaned down, and whispered into his ear. Fang Ruli's expression darkened as he asked, "A small shop stole all of our customers? You don't know where the owner came from? A lot of prestigious individuals frequent his shop." He smiled evilly and said, "Then, he must be careful. There were countless immoral measures that one could take. Assassination? That was the stupidest idea. If the owner of a shop like the Origins Internet Club died, everyone would get angry. Even if he successfully assassinated the owner of the Origins Internet Club, he would be blamed and punished." Pang Ruli had been serving the upper-class individuals in Zhuhua City for years and expanded the Beast Garden to what it was today. Therefore, he knew how not to burn himself but also had various tricks up his sleeve. With a dark expression, he whispered into his maid's ear, "Tell those from Blood Web to go and take care of it. In this world, victory could be won without a battle. For example, they already noticed a little loli who was on her own. The prey has left its home." Outside the internet cafe, a few pairs of cold eyes stared at Zhang Xiaoyu as she walked outside. Those from Blood Web were hunters who killed and hunted valuable monsters and beasts to earn significant profits. Of course, if the price was right, they didn't mind hunting down humans. Since they had to deal with powerful monsters, they were all powerful and experienced. The weakest hunters were ancestral warriors. Normal warriors wouldn't dare to offend this group of people. I didn't expect it to be a defenseless little girl. Although it seemed like a super easy task, they still had to give it their full effort. They were experienced, so they knew not to let the prey escape. The prey is nearing the hunting area, get ready. Yesterday, Zhang Xiaoyu was touched by the stories in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Why is Ki's ending so depressing? Why is Ling's fate so tragic? I need to work hard to play this game, so I can save them all, she muttered to herself with determination. At the thought of changing their fates, Zhang Xiaoyu became excited. I'm much smarter than that stupid owner, I can definitely do it. She left the shop because she needed to go grocery shopping. If she wanted to make money, she had to learn how to cook. After all, she still owed Fang Qi a few crystals. I need to pay him back, I don't want to owe him money. She thought to herself angrily, failing to notice any abnormalities around her. I should pick something easy to make, or else the stupid owner might fire me if I screw up. In the end, Zhang Xiaoyu picked a few simple dishes on the cookbook and began listing out the ingredients. Soon, she was out of the range of the shop. The prey will enter the trap in 30 steps, get the black crossbow ready. The prey will enter the trap in 15 steps, get the energy locking net ready. Why is it so quiet today? Zhang Xiaoyu closed her cookbook and glanced around. Only then did she realize that she didn't see a single pedestrian on her way here. It's so weird. Suddenly, an eerie wind blew past her. Then, a silver, shiny giant net fell from the sky, wrapping her tightly. This silver net was weird, the more she struggled, the tighter it became. You shouldn't struggle. 2 rows of people surrounded her and said, this energy locking net was made from the spider webs of a 1,000-year-old Xiaoluo spider. Not only is it unbreakable, it can also suppress spiritual energy and warrior qi. Even monsters and beasts that are as powerful as ancestral warriors have no choice but to surrender inside this net. The man in front was a tall, strong warrior who was wearing a red shirt. His long eyes emitted murderous spirit as he pointed at a black crossbow behind him and said, there's poison on this. If you're not careful, you'll die. What do you want? Zhang Xiaoyu was furious. All she wanted to do was buy groceries, how dare they treat her this way? What do I want? The warrior in red smiled evilly and replied, don't be scared, we won't hurt you. We just want you to come with us. Then, he glanced at the person beside him and asked, did you find out everything? Are there any other problems? I did. A short warrior who looked really powerful replied, after this little girl was chased out by Jinfu Hostel, the owner of the internet cafe, Fang Qi, took her in. She's the only one who is considered close to the owner. He really is a nice owner. The warrior in red smiled darkly. I guess he won't want to see this little girl's face all scraped up and sold in the black market. Then, he slowly approached Zhang Xiaoyu, took out the dagger on his waist, and carved out a flower in the air with his warrior qi. His smile looked murderous and he said, we looked into the shop. A master is keeping the shop safe, so we can't do anything about it. Also, the owner's powers are shocking as well, so we could only start with you. Little girl, please don't blame us. Although their only mission was to capture a young girl in her teens, Bloodweb still conducted a thorough investigation. Don't expect the owner to come and save you. Our estimations show that he is at most an ancestral warrior, but he glanced around and said with a deep voice, word for word, we are all of higher realms. As he spoke, the air around him became icy, cutting at Zhang Xiaoyu's skin. This murderous spirit enveloped the entire street, along with a heavy sense of oppression. Even the other hunters couldn't help but shiver at this feeling. Our boss is so murderous, it's horrifying. I bet that this little girl's going to burst out in tears soon. The warrior in red tapped Zhang Xiaoyu's cheek with the body of his knife and laughed arrogantly, after all, you're just a little girl. Oh, you're only ancestral warriors, Zhang Xiaoyu finally spoke. It took her a while to understand what was happening. Upon hearing this, the air in the area froze as everyone fell silent. Only. The hunters looked at each other and almost burst out in laughing. Did a girl in her teens just make fun of us? However, what Zhang Xiaoyu did next was so incomprehensible that they couldn't laugh anymore. Rib. Her white, pearly hands tore a giant hole in the energy-locking net, which was supposed to be extremely durable. The arrogant hunters of Bloodweb felt their hearts sink as they all felt chills up their spines. Isn't she just a teenage girl? Wasn't she kicked out from another shop and taken in by Fang Qi? Isn't she just an employee of that small shop? How in the world did she rip the energy locking net apart? What is going on? What kind of powers does she have? Countless questions appeared in their minds as their brains went into overdrive. She's just lucky. How strong of a warrior or cultivator can a girl in her teens be? The warrior in red spat viciously, "Kill her. Let me see how long she can keep up her act." He was right, it didn't matter how talented of a warrior or cultivator she was, her teenage age still restricted her. Of course, never in their dreams would they realize that this seemingly harmless girl was neither a cultivator nor a warrior. Yuan Qi was a captain of the Zhuhua City Patrol Force, and he was in charge of the area around Origin's Internet Club. When he was patrolling near the market, he suddenly heard loud shrieks. "What's going on? It's coming from the south. Come on, let's go check it out." Yuan Qi was close to where the sound came from, so he quickly went over and realized that the shrieks came from a secluded little alley at the end of the street. As he glanced into the alley, he saw a doll-like little girl who was about 12 or 13 years old. She was wearing a white traditional skirt, holding a vegetable basket, and skipping away while humming some songs. "Hey! Let's go check it out." Yuan Qi and the others immediately ran into the alley, dumbfounded by what they saw. About 10 bulky-looking men in red light on the ground left and right, no one could get up. The only thought in their minds was, how is she, just an employee? "Boss, these people," one of the guards mentioned uncertainly, "they look like hunters from Blood Web." Blood Web? Yuan Qi froze for a second before his eyes lit up. "Arrest them all. We've just made a great contribution. Let's go report to the Castellan," he shouted. "Isn't it a little far from here to the Castellan's mansion?" The guard was confused, but Yuan Qi slapped him on the head and said, "Go to the internet cafe nearby." Bye. Emotional people like Shen Qingqing and Su Zixin always prepared a giant pack of tissues next to them for a rainy day. At this time, Fang Qi finally received a new task from his system that was related to the next game. Introduce the legend of the sword and fairy to 300 people and make them feel touched by the story. Task progress 40/300. Task reward, Counter-Strike, Virtual Reality Remake. Task description, N/A. Fang Qi was initially excited to see a new task, but he wailed out in sadness as soon as he saw the requirement. He was dumbstruck. He got less than 200 customers, how was he supposed to introduce the legend of the sword and fairy to 300 people? Was his system kidding him? Moreover, there were only 40 people who played the legend of the sword and fairy. Including the group of people who watched others play and didn't want to spend money on the game, he had 70 viewers at most. That's too many. Where am I supposed to find 300 players who are willing to play the legend of the sword and fairy? Fang Qi complained, unless we lower the prices. Then, he suddenly received a hint from the system, please use the new shop and equipment reasonably. The new shop? Fang Qi rubbed his chin and muttered to himself, the two shops will be able to hold 100 or so computers. The upper limit of the two shops is 150 computers, so I will be able to host 150 customers at the same time. Even so, how was he going to get all the players to play the legend of the sword and fairy? Wait, new equipment? A light bulb in Fang Qi head lit up as he shouted, live stream. Qin Mountain Beast Garden. Pang Ruli sat in his mansion, smoking his tobacco pipe. The entire room was filled with white smoke. Why aren't they back yet? Pang Ruli sent the hunters a long time ago, and it was a simple mission. However, it had been so long, why hasn't anyone gotten back to him? Suddenly, the maid who oversaw intelligence reports in Pang Ruli's business walked up to him in a rush. Her face was filled with panic as she said, Master, why are you panicking? Pang Ruli slammed his palm on the table. What's going on? Blood Web was completely annihilated when they were trying to capture that employee of the shop, the maid reported, they've all been arrested by the city guards. It took a couple of seconds before Pang Ruli came back to his senses. Isn't everyone in Bloodweb ancestral warriors or higher? How could they be completely annihilated while capturing an employee of a tiny shop? A dozen of ancestral warriors were annihilated while trying to ambush a weak employee of a small shop? How could that even happen? His eyes opened wide with shock as he asked, "Are you sure?" "I am." The maid bowed down and reported, "According to my sources, they sent the best hunters to deal with the little girl," but Pang Ruli was at a loss for words for a few seconds before asking, "Where are they now?" "They're locked up in the underground prison in Zhuhua City." The maid replied respectfully. "Will this expose us?" he asked. His maid bowed down and reported, "We're always very careful." Only then did Pang Ruli feel some relief as he sucked on his pipe. He fell back in his chair and spat out a mouthful of white smoke as he murmured, "It seems like we won't be able to use force on a shop like this, then what should we do?" Pang Ruli snickered, "This shop gathered so many noblemen and cultivators in such a short amount of time, I'm positive that I'm not the only one whom that owner offended. If he's just a powerful warrior or cultivator, I wouldn't be able to deal with him. However, how dare he try to battle me in terms of business?" Pang Ruli's smile became colder than ever. "I will write a letter. As long as we do this meticulously, this little shop will shut down in no time." The Liu Yundaist Palace didn't do anything after what happened with Xiao Yulv and Su Fuwei. After investigating into this matter, it was obvious that Xiao Yulv was the one who caused trouble. Also, they were still trying to find out what forces were hidden behind the shop. Therefore, they didn't want to act rashly. The more they investigated the shop, the more shocked they became. Not only did they fail to find out where this shop came from, they received additional information that made them reevaluate the shop's power. The fact that the Nalan family's shadow guards were kicked out made them realize that if they sent more people there, they would only be shooting themselves in the foot. The Tiangang elder, Xiao Chonglong, had been in seclusion cultivation for a very long time. Xiao Yulv only received minor injuries, so there was no way that he would come out of seclusion cultivation because of such trivial matters. Therefore, the Liu Yundao Palace had no choice but to swallow their unhappiness. However, the things changed a few days ago. Su Tianji, a genius of the last generation who had been cultivating in the mountains and never asked about worldly affairs, came out of seclusion cultivation. After coming out of seclusion cultivation, she had reached the early stage of the Divine Ocean Realm, making her one of the top masters of Liu Yundaist Palace. Moreover, she was appointed as an elder in the name of Tianji Liu Yun Immortal. The Liu Yundaist Palace was located in the Thousand Cloud Mountains, which was in the east region of Dajin. The mountains were hard to climb for ordinary people, and they were on the same level as the Cloud Ocean faction. Clouds and fog hovered over the cliffs, mountains, and rocks stacked on top of each other, and the birds and beasts were everywhere in the wilderness. When Su Tianji was appointed as an elder, those from the Wu Vidaist alliance came to congratulate her, as well as envoys from various factions and sects. Countless cultivators gathered together and discussed Heavenly Dao for 3 days. The event was truly a grand occasion. However, on the 4th day, jade pillars stood in Tianji Palace as flying phenoxes and spiritual herbs were engraved on them. Outside the palace stood a pavilion that was surrounded by a sea of flowers. Paintings were hung on the walls of the halls that were in between spiritual herbs and rare plants. The area was arranged according to the position of the stars and was connected well. Looking from above, one would notice that the entire area looked like the sky at night. This was the place where Su Tianji cultivated. Xiao Yulv and Su Fuwei had been standing respectfully outside the palace for a long time. Junior brother Xiao, Su Fuwei whispered, "Elder Su hasn't tended to worldly matters for many years, will she really help us to get rid of personal grudges?" "What do you mean?" Xiao Yulv sneered, "Tiangang elder is my grandpa, and now my aunt is the Tianji elder. No one in the world can offend me. A little shop embarrassed me and threw me out twice." Xiao Yulv clenched his teeth angrily and said, I will see how they can embarrass me again this time. I'm going to redeem all the pride that I lost. After Su Tianji came out of seclusion, countless Dajin cultivators came to congratulate her. The Liu Yundaist Palace took this opportunity to hold a grand discussion inside Tiangsu Palace. This was the biggest Daoist event that Liu Yundaist Palace had held in decades. On the first day of the event, various cultivators expressed their views based on their own cultivations, and everyone benefited from each other. The event was extremely successful. However, things began to show slight changes when Ye Songtao, the faction master of Cloud Ocean faction, came to congratulate Su Tianji and join in the discussion on the next day. 2 days ago, inside Tiangsu Palace there are two kinds of qi in this world, pure and turbid. During my seclusion cultivation, I've been enlightened in this area, and therefore I hope to discuss it with everyone here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This event was organized for Su Tianji, so she was the host. It floats like nothingness and returns to its Daoist path. Yes. Your enlightenment is truly wonderful. I have an understanding of qi, but my understanding is not as deep nor as profound as yours. Therefore, I'm not going to show my slight understanding before a master, the others exclaimed in awe as well. Just then, she saw that Ye Songtao wanted to say something, so she asked, "Faction Master Yet, do you have any objections?" Ye Songtao glanced around the room and asked, "Have you heard of the legend of the sword and fairy?" Hey! The crowd looked at each other in confusion and thought, "We are talking about Daoism, why did you go off topic and bring up the legend of the sword and fairy?" Upon looking at everyone's confused expressions, Ye Songtao said with a stern expression, "I don't think qi is so mysterious. It's as gentle as water, benefits all things but does not compete. If one's heart is as calm as water, their qi will be stable. If the qi is stable, one can use it to control things in nature." Then, he asked, "Have any of you heard of the sword control technique?" Sword control technique. The crowd was more confused than ever. Using qi to control things, with which one can fly on swords. Ye Songtao said copiously, "The sword control technique emphasizes the use of qi, let me show you." Then, Ye Songtao gestured using his finger, and a sword jumped out of its scabbard as if it were alive. Then, it circled him like a silver snake. When mastered, one can fly on the sword for thousands of kilometers. Spiritual artifacts are not needed. With this technique, the sword could fly away for thousands of kilometers and remove the head of the enemy like a piece of cake. This is the meaning behind the phrase, "With the celestial sword, I can go to the heavens and enter the netherworld." Upon seeing Ye Songtao's sword control technique, the crowd lit up. They could tell that he was just using an ordinary sword, but it seemed alive and extremely agile under his control. "This sword is controlled by qi?" a cultivator asked curiously. Normally, the spiritual artifacts used by cultivators had to be made from precious materials and be refined multiple times. Then, the cultivators must use their own spiritual energy and qi to further cultivate them before the artifacts can be used so freely. To most cultivators, qi was invisible, but artifacts were visible. Therefore, if a person really wanted to use objects to their liking, only the spiritual artifacts could do that. However, the sword control technique was capable of completely controlling an ordinary object. As gentle as water benefits all things but does not compete. An ordinary technique couldn't awe the masses. However, what Ye Songtao said stunned the cultivators here. After some pondering, the cultivators realized that this phrase seemed simple but was deep and profound. Moreover, it contained the ultimate truth. I've never heard a state of mind and principle so ingenious. Faction Master Yet, did you come to the realization yourself? I read it from a text called Dao De Jing, one Ye Songtao said as he shook his head. He saw Fang Qi character flip through this book in the game, and he picked up a few key phrases from it. How can we learn this technique? The cultivators grew more curious about the sword control technique. Can we learn it from Dao De Jing? no. Ye Song Tao shook his head again and said, that's why you should go out and walk around. How can you be unaware of the sword control technique? I learned this technique from someone called the Liquor Sword Immortal. Aside from the sword control technique, there is also the innumerable sword technique and heavenly sword technique. When one reaches mastery, he or she can summon the sword god to fight enemies, Lu Songtao explained. The cultivators gasped, one can summon the sword god? This sounds like a powerful skill. Really? You can summon the god within the sword. Su Tianji's beautiful face fell as she watched the cultivators walk up to Ye Songtao. After Ye Songtao left, the discussion quickly ended. Su Tianji originally thought that this interruption was just an interlude and wouldn't affect anything. After all, Ye Songtao was a faction master and didn't have time to discuss Daoism every day. However, she realized how naive she was on the third day. The third day in Huawei, the castellan of Zhuhua City, Ouyang Zhen, the master of the Ouyang family, and Buletin Lei, the master of the Buletin family are here to congratulate Elder Su. Not only did faction master Ye congratulate Elder Su himself, but city masterin, Master Ouyang, and Master Buletin are here as well. The others were shocked since people of their status usually would send envoys rather than appear in person. Before the discussions began, Su Tianji asked the servants to bring desserts, wine, and various other snacks. However, An Huawei furrowed slightly and said, this wine is drinkable, but it's nothing compared to Sprite. You're right. Ouyang Zhen shook his head and added, the desserts aren't as good as Haagen-Dazs. High-status envoys from the Wu Daoist alliance were sitting beside them, and they asked curiously, what kind of wine is Sprite? It's better than this Xianxiang wine from Liu Daoist Palace. What's Haagen-Dazs? An Huawei explained to them as he reminisced its taste, Sprite is an absolute delicacy. It's made of mineral water from under the snowy mountains, which had been tempered by thousand-year volcanic rock. It circulated for hundreds of years and was eventually melted and filtered. It's cold spring water from volcanic rocks. In addition, it is blended with the honey that is created by bees that collected pollen from a spiritual flower called the ice heart flower. Upon hearing this, the other cultivators immediately crowded around them. Su Tianji was at a loss for words at this familiar scene. Su Tianji sat inside the Tianji palace with a complicated expression on her face. Have I been in seclusion for too long? How can so many things happen without me knowing? She felt like the entire world around her changed after coming out of seclusion. The legend of the sword and fairy? Sprite? Haagen-Dazs? The liquor sword immortal. She leaned on a wide chair that was covered by snowy white fur and reminisced the poem that she heard. The imperial sword arrives with the wind, eliminating evil from heaven and earth. I will be thrilled if I have liquor, but I'm still insane when I don't. I will drink the lakes and rivers and then swallow the sun and moon. I am the liquor sword immortal, the only person who is left standing after 1,000 drinks. Who is capable of writing a poem like this? Also, what is the sword control technique? Faction master Ye, city masterin, and even that old master from Jiangnan study this technique. She glanced at her disciples and asked, do you know the liquor sword immortal? Her disciples glanced at each other, not sure what she was talking about. People of your status won't be able to meet a master like him. Do any of you know a small shop called Origins? Su Tianji batted her beautiful eyes as she thought in all seriousness, does the liquor sword immortal live there? I know. I know. Suddenly, a figure ran into the hall. Su Tianji glanced at Xiao Yulv, and her expression lit up. Take me there. TL note, the Tao Te Ching, also known by its pinyin romanization Dao De Jing, is a Chinese classic text traditionally credited to the 6th century BC sage Laozi. For example, a young man in red who just walked in was Hong Ling Feng. He was An Cheng's friend and originally thought that this internet cafe was just a new form of entertainment. However, he slowly realized that things weren't as simple as he thought when his master asked him if he knew a small shop called Origins Internet Club. Now, Hong Ling Feng walked in with a grey-haired elder who had a silver beard. Behind the elder was a few cultivators. The elder smiled and said, "Ling Feng, I came today to meet the Liquor Sword Immortal and witness the sword control technique. Let's not advertise our identities." "Yes, Master." Hong Ling Feng nodded as he walked up to the counter and took out some crystals. "Sir, please activate the Legend of the Sword and Fairy for me." Fang Qi glanced around and replied, "That's fine, but there are no empty spots right now." Hong Ling Feng scratched his head and walked back to the elder. "Master, we may have to stand in line for a while." "What?" The disciples behind the elder were angered by this and said, "Junior brother Hong, what does the owner mean by that? Our master has to line up. Don't be like this." The grey-haired elder glared at his disciple angrily. "Didn't I say not to advertise our presence? Ling Feng, where is Castellanan?" Hong Ling Feng glanced around and saw An Hui and the others standing behind Nalan Hung Guyu, so he pointed at them and said, "They're over there, standing in line." "They're standing in line as well." The elder was surprised. "Then, I might as well wait and catch up with Hui and the others." Then, the elder calmly went over to wait. Fang Qi was dumbstruck by how rule-abiding his customers were. No one was here to cause trouble. Xiao Yul felt like today was his lucky day. He didn't think things would go so smoothly, and his auntie immediately agreed to come with him. "Did my auntie find out about what happened and is looking to seek revenge for me?" Xiao Yul muttered to himself, barely able to contain his laughter. It was natural from him to think that way. After all, the Liu Yundaist palace was overprotective, and he was the grandson of Xiao Chonglong, the Tiangang elder. In the past, his faction always supported him unconditionally, no matter what he did. Therefore, he never thought of other possibilities. Upon seeing the new and improved shop front, Xiao Yul felt the deep hatred as he pointed at it and said, "This is Origins Internet Club." Then, he entered the shop with Su Tianji, feeling extremely at ease. "With my auntie's help, you won't be able to do anything to me." Since Ye Songtao and the others deviated from the original topic, the discussion about the Heavenly Dao felt a little unorganized and messy. However, even though Ye Songtao only briefly mentioned the sword control technique, the use of Qi, and Dao De Jing, the enlightenment that she obtained from the breakthrough gradually became clearer. As gentle as water, benefits all things but does not compete. She carefully thought back at the principle behind this sentence, and she felt like her realm and state of mind slowly became more stable. Compared to the atmosphere of a discussion, advancing her realm was more important. She benefited from these words from just thinking about them. This proved the indisputable power of the Liquor Sword Immortal. Su Tianji decided to come and pay her respect to this legendary person. Moreover, she discovered that Duke Nalan was studying the sword control technique here as well. It seemed only natural for her to visit. To her surprise, among so many disciples at Liu Yundaist Palace, only Xiao Yulv could bring her here. Therefore, she had no choice but to let Xiao Yulv bring her here. That was all she needed him to do. If she knew what was going to happen next, or if she looked into the events that had happened recently, she would have tried to find the way herself instead of asking Xiao Yulv to bring her here. After opening the door, Su Tianji was just about to introduce herself and pay her respects when she saw something that left her completely dumbstruck and mortified. "Where's the owner? Tell him to come out." Xiao Yulv strode into the shop and shouted, "If I don't smash this place up and beat him half dead today, I'm going to change my last name." Quickly, Xiao Yulv found Fang Qi who was sitting by the door instead of in front of a computer. He slammed the counter in front of him and smiled with animosity. "Try to throw me out again today." Confused, Fang Qi asked Xiao Yulv, "Why are you here again?" Su Tianji froze. If she could turn back time, she would definitely ask how Xiao Yulv knew about this shop. However, she couldn't do that. At this time, she noticed that everyone in the shop glanced over towards her direction, and she recognized most of them. An Hui, Ouyang Cheng, Yesong Tao, Hong Ling Feng's master, the Yinlong elder, and the Wu Vi Daoist Alliance's envoy, Wang Quan were all here. Even Nalan Hongguo looked up upon hearing the noise by the door. Everyone's gaze landed on Xiao Yulv and Su Tianji. Elder Su, are you here to cause trouble today? They looked at Su Tianji with surprise, and her beautiful face almost exploded from anger. Throw him out immediately. Before Fang Qi even moved, Xiao Yulv felt his body being lifted into the air. Then, he was thrown out of the shop. Why was I kicked out again? Xiao Yulv thought in bewilderment as history repeated itself for the third time. I am Su Tianji from the Liu Yundaist Palace. I'm here to pay my respect to the liquor sword immortal. After throwing Xiao Yulv out, Su Tianji felt her anger dissipate. Even faction master Yet and Castellanan study the sword control technique here, and a man of Nalan Hongguo's status has to abide by the rules. How dare that little brat threaten to smash this place up? Su Tianji wondered if her nephew's head had been kicked in by a donkey. She slowly came to the realization that she might have missed some important information while she was in seclusion cultivation. A wave of complicated emotions surged into her head. She was enlightened upon hearing the Daoist principles by chance and wanted to pay her tribute. It was supposed to be a good thing, but her idiotic nephew ruined everything. However, she didn't have time to linger on the trivial matters. She didn't even have time to think about the sword control technique or even the Dao De Jing. The only thing on her mind was that she couldn't afford to make anyone in the shop her enemy. Or else, nothing good would happen to her. Just then, she heard the young man who was supposedly the owner of the shop say faintly, "It's 20 crystals to activate. There are a lot of people right now, so you have to line up." Her gaze landed on Nalan Hongguo, but she had no idea what he was doing in his seat. Could those with higher status wait while sitting down? Daoist Yinlong, Daoist Su, Daoist Wang, and Hui said as he watched Nalan Hongguo play the legend of the sword and fairy, "It's still early, so I think we might have to wait a while. Would you like to have some Häagen-Dazs while waiting?" Upon noticing that they were all staring at Nalan Hongguo, he added, "Duke Nalan is busy right now, he doesn't have time to talk." Fang Qi repeatedly warned Nalan Hongguo about shouting in the shop, so he turned off his outside communication function just in case he accidentally yelled out during the game. He was a wise old man and knew that everyone, including himself, would go crazy if the owner got mad and closed the shop. Häagen-Dazs. Yinlong elder suddenly thought of something and said, "Castellanan, didn't you say last time that Häagen-Dazs tastes better than the Liu Yundaist Palace's spiritual fruits? Let us try it." And Hui laughed loudly, "Perfect. Allow me, the Castellan, to treat everyone to Häagen-Dazs. This is considered a specialty of Zhuhua City. Trust me, you won't be able to taste it anywhere else." He leaned against Nalan Hongguo's chair as he said this. It was weird that the Castellan of Zhuhua didn't even have a seat. Su Tianji wondered if this was really Castellan An Xiaoyu. And Hui had gotten to know this little girl. "Get us 3 Häagen-Dazs ice creams." Soon, a lowly in white handed them each a delicate little box. The box felt cold to the touch as if there was ice inside. They exclaimed, "What's in here?" "Ice. Try it and you'll see," and Hui explained. "Aren't you going to have any, Castellanan?" Yinlong elder became more curious than ever. If it were so good, why wasn't An Hui eating any? An Hui looked awkward as he responded, "This is an amazing shop, but there are a lot of rules. For example, each person can only have 1 container of Häagen-Dazs every day." Seriously? Yinlong elder was the oldest in the group, and he had seen all walks of life. Yet, he was intrigued. "This rule sounds unreasonable, I'd like to taste it and see how good this snack really is." "Me too. I would like to know if Häagen-Dazs is really as good as Castellanan says." I'm surprised that you said it tastes better than Liu Yundaist Palace's spiritual fruits. Although Su Tianji had to admit that the sword techniques in this shop were ingenious, she didn't think that the Liu Yundaist Palace would lose to a little shop in every category. As soon as she finished speaking, she scooped up some ice cream with the wooden spoon and gave it a taste. Then, her eyes opened wide in surprise as if she just sensed something incredible. The ice cream melted as soon as it touched her tongue. It was the middle of summer, so the cold ice cream felt amazing. Most importantly, as it melted, a rich vanilla fragrance wrapped around her taste buds. This aromatic sweetness made her feel like all the sweetness and happiness in the world had surrounded her. This was such a lingering feeling. It even improved her slightly down mood. This is the most delicious snack I've ever tasted. Yinlong Elder and Wang Quan enjoyed the Haagen-Dazs as they shouted out praises. But I can only have one per day, so I'd better eat slowly. Su Tianji froze upon muttering this to herself. Did I just seriously say that? Just then, she saw An Huey who was still staring at Nalan Honggu's screen saying, "Your progress is really fast. You're almost at the Lu estate, right?" "What's the Lu estate?" The three of them glanced over upon hearing this. They noticed that there were different animations and characters on every customer's screen, but they didn't look at them in detail before. After they realized that An Huey was staring at Nalan Honggu's screen, they began doing the same thing. In the center of the screen was a palm-sized young man jumping up and down using the light foot technique. He didn't stop unless he needed to talk to someone. What confused them was that they could see the young man's name above his head. What is that? This made these people curious. They originally thought that the young man was using a spiritual artifact that could project images, but it didn't seem right. Why would an image display a person's name? Of course, Nalan Honggu could have turned off the name displaying function. However, as an experienced gamer, it was more convenient for him to leave it on. Most of the experienced gamers did that. Only new players would turn off this function so that the world would feel more real to them. "This is the legend of the sword and fairy," An Huey responded, "Aren't you here to play this game?" "This is the legend of the sword and fairy." The three of them were flabbergasted. None of them have been out in a while. Could it be that we have gotten derailed from current society? What about the liquor sword immortal? Dumbstruck, they stared at the screen and thought, do we use this to communicate with the liquor sword immortal? You can say that, and Huey didn't know how to explain what computers were to cultivators who had been in seclusion for a long period of time. Coincidentally, the gamer beside Nalan Honggu reached his daily limit. An Huey was the castellan, and these three beside him were guests. He didn't think it was a good idea to let them wait around while he played, so he said shamelessly, "Who wants to play first? I'll teach you." This game is also a specialty of Zhuhua City. The three glanced at each other and thought, the method of meeting the liquor sword immortal is really weird. After some back and forth, they decided that the Yinlong Elder, the oldest of the three, should try the game first. The Yinlong Elder sat down on the computer chair and began the game with help from An Huey. When the new story began, the Yinlong Elder felt like he had entered another world. Su Tianji stared intently at the screen, wanting to see what happens once a person uses this spiritual artifact. The legend of the sword and fairy quickly began. Soon, they saw the young man in the screen suddenly jumping off a cliff and landing on a flying sword. Is this the sword control technique? Did I just learn the sword control technique? The Yinlong Elder exclaimed in shock as he instinctively began to control Li Xiaoao. I can go anywhere with a sword in my hand. I'm 10 times better than Faction Master yet. You learned it already. The other two were flabbergasted. 10 times better. How is that possible? Yesong Tao had been learning sword control technique for a while, so how can the Yinlong Elder be 10 times better already? The sword control technique that the Yinlong Elder was currently using in his dream was the one that Li Xiaoao had mastered at the end of the game. Its power was mightier than a beginner who was just exposed to the technique. The man and the sword soared through the heavens and earth. The Yinlong elder looked down, and he saw the clouds below him, the wind howling beside him, and thunder cracking above him. At that moment, he suddenly felt like he could go anywhere in this world with this sword. That rush of excitement shot into his brain like a cannonball. This powerful sword technique could really allow him to go into the heavens and even the netherworld. He never thought that he could experience the sword control technique this way. This encounter left him in shock and awe. Dumbstruck, he muttered, "Castellanon, what kind of artifact is this? How did I master a heaven-level sword technique so quickly?" An Hui explained, "Dea ist Yinlong, it's just a demo." Demo. Yinlong elder froze. Before he could digest what demo meant, he was sneak attacked by that old ugly monster and woke up from his dream. "Damn, how dare you hit me, old lady!" In the screen, Auntie Li was beating Li Xiaoao up with a wok. At this time, Li Xiaoao had zero martial arts skills, so the Yinlong elder had to endure a beating. The good news was that the others didn't really understand what was going on. Otherwise, it would be super embarrassing. An Hui felt awkward. This old man came without any understanding of the game? To avoid further embarrassment, he quickly taught the three what the game was and what computers were. After listening to An Hui's explanation, they finally understood what was going on. Liquor Sword Immortal is a character in the game. He's not a real person. I can't believe that we had so much respect for him. Wang Quan felt like he had been deceived. However, after An Hui told him that the sword control technique was real, he looked at the screen with a dramatically different expression. What is good about meeting an elder? Wang Quan couldn't do anything but pay respects and take good care of an elder. But the sword control technique is different. I can learn it. At this thought, Wang Quan's eyes lit up. As a man of status, Wang Quan was intelligent. He knew what it meant to learn a powerful skill like the sword control technique. If it were possible to master this convenient and powerful technique, the world that they lived in would undergo a revolution. For a split second, he felt like snatching these spiritual artifacts and taking this technique for himself. However, even Nalan Hongwu was playing the game obediently. Wang Quan knew that if he were to do anything, he would probably have an ugly ending. Su Tianji, on the other hand, felt like the world had changed after she came out of seclusion cultivation. She stared at the screen in front of her curiously and thought, how is a spiritual artifact like this created? Moreover, who created this artifact and the sword control technique? Xiao Yulv, who was kicked out abruptly, finally managed to get up from the ground. He cursed in his head, who the **ck dared to do this to me? If I find them, I'm going to kill them. Never did he think that he would be kicked out for the third time. Moreover, he didn't know that it was his aunt, who was supposed to back him, that ordered him to be thrown out. I need to figure this out. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Therefore, he pushed open the door of the shop again. As soon as he went in, he saw Su Tianji. She was wearing a white robe, and behind her were a couple of her female disciples also in white. Their presence drew quite the attention. Xiao Yulv realized that his aunt was standing in line. He rubbed his eyes and blinked a couple more times. Am I seeing this right? Yes. That woman was his aunt, Su Tianji. What is going on? Is she still that genius cultivator of her generation? After I got kicked out, she stood in line obediently. Xiao Yulv felt like his world was crumbling around him. He immediately walked up to her and saw something even more unbelievable. Powerful individuals like An Hui, Wu Yangzhen, and the Yinlong elder were all standing neatly in line. How is this possible? Why would people of their status stand in line at a small shop like this? An Hui is the Castellan, why is he standing in line? That person must be a fake, right? Xiao Yulv looked at them in bewilderment, and his face became as pale as a ghost's. You've finally come to your senses. Noticing his presence, Su Tianji glanced at Xiao Yulv. He looked at Su Tianji, who was standing in line. For a split second, he wondered if the Su Tianji standing in front of him was an impostor. However, when his gaze met hers, the coldness in her eyes made his entire body tremor like a scared little bunny. "Tell me what happened between you and this shop." Su Tianji thought back at Xiao Yulv's actions angrily and seemed to understand what happened. "You sure gained a lot of courage while your grandpa and I were in seclusion cultivation." Xiao Yulv's heart sank after hearing his aunt's words. Then, he glanced at An Huey and the others who were patiently waiting in line. "Did I really offend someone I shouldn't have? It's just a tiny little shop." Xiao Yulv thought with a complicated expression on his face as he cursed over and over again, "All I did was be pretentious here, who did I offend?" He had no choice but to tell Su Tianji everything that had happened. Upon hearing this, An Huey trembled with fear but also sighed in relief. If this little brat didn't provoke the owner and wasn't struck by lightning, no one would know how powerful this place is. If I did what Xiao Yulv did, the city might be in trouble. Therefore, he immediately said, "In my opinion, the shop didn't lose anything, so as long as you stop provoking the owner, he won't make your life hard. That'll be the end of that." However, he shook his head and continued, "The rules in this shop will never change, so don't expect to play games here in the future." Su Tianji felt the same way, so she waved her hand in annoyance. "Go and apologize to the owner. If he's willing to forgive you, then you can put this entire incident behind you." "You want me to apologize?" Xiao Yulv pointed at himself in bewilderment. "Apologizing is so embarrassing. Am I supposed to apologize for you?" Su Tianji glared at Xiao Yulv with her hazel eyes. "I'll go right now." Xiao Yulv jumped up in fear. Even though she was lining up in this small shop, she was still Su Tianji. He was terrified of her. Fang Qi and Shen Qingqing were discussing how to publish the official Diablo novel. The most popular novel right now was Celestial Warrior, but it only sold a couple of thousand copies in Zhuhua City. Therefore, Shen Qingqing wanted to create 1,000 copies for the time being. The less they published, the more they could pay attention to the overall quality. They already made plans to publish the official novel with Dongguan Book Forest, the biggest bookstore in the city. However, Fang Qi made some suggestions to the front page design and layout, which would take a little longer to finalize. Therefore, they weren't in a hurry and were currently talking about the other details. Suddenly, Fang Qi saw Xiao Yulv walking up to him and couldn't help but laugh in his mind. "You're here again?" He was just about to tell the system that someone was causing trouble when Xiao Yulv took a deep breath in, paused for a couple of seconds, and said with a red face and gritted teeth, "I'm sorry for offending you in the past." He may be apologizing, but he was actually cursing Fang Qi in his head. Surprised, Fang Qi thought to himself, "Is this dude changing up his usual strategy? Is that all?" Xiao Yulv glared at Fang Qi secretly and thought in his head, "You've made a good decision." However, when Fang Qi glanced his way, he immediately turned around and ran back to Su Tianji just in case Fang Qi changed his mind. Then, he turned around again and heaved a sigh of relief upon noticing that Fang Qi didn't seem to change his mind. "That little..." He was going to say little brat but quickly change his words, "That little owner probably saw how handsome and impressive I am." Before he could finish, Su Tianji glared at him coldly, so he quickly wrapped up, I'm done." Only then did Su Tianji go back to watching Nalan Hongguo and the Yinlong Elder. A lot of people such as Su Tianji, her disciples and the Yinlong Elder's disciples crowded behind the Yinlong Elder, watching him play as they ate Haagen-Dazs. It was a spectacular scene to see. After witnessing the impressive sword control technique, everyone began to anticipate what was going to happen next even though it was just a game. To Su Tianji, this was a small world that existed to help cultivators gain experience. The last time she heard about a small world was a long time ago when she first began cultivating. Back then, Her master and her senior brothers went there together, but a few of her senior brothers disappeared and her master sustained heavy injuries. To her surprise, someone created a world like this during her time in seclusion cultivation. She was bewildered. Most importantly, the cultivators wouldn't get hurt by playing the game and could start over if they died. With time, even low-level warriors would be able to master high-level spiritual spells and techniques that they couldn't get their hands on in the past. Of course, the speed of learning depended on the talent of individuals. The times are indeed changing, she exclaimed in her head. Those standing behind Nalan Hongyu all had different thoughts in their head. Su Tianji and the Yunlong elders' disciples thought, Castellanin just mentioned that leveling up in the game could improve my own strength. If I'm as good as the owner, I can cultivate faster than the geniuses in my sect, I would be able to surpass them. Wang Quan's thoughts were somewhat more long-term orientated. When Castellanin explained the game, he said that given our current level, we will obtain more progress than training on our own. The owner of this shop sure came up with a good idea. Cultivators like them achieved improvement through the accumulation of time and effort. They wouldn't see results after training for a day or a week. True breakthrough required at least a couple decades of training along with outside forces such as elixirs. This meant that they could play games to replace cultivating on their own. This was an unprecedented form of entertainment. After all, playing other things for fun was a waste of time for them. But will these old masters achieve breakthroughs? Wang Quan stared at Nalan Hongyu and thought, they've been stuck at their current realms for a significant amount of time. If they could, even if it is just a sliver of hope. Too scared to ask, he decided to go back to watching them play. Of course, no one knew that it was another force that made them come back to the internet cafe, which wasn't the hunger for power or technique. Instead, it was something called addiction. When An Huey explained the game to others, Xiao Yulv was apologizing to Fang Qi and didn't know what he missed. He also didn't know that he would never be allowed to play the game. At the moment, he just stood in the crowd and watched Nalan Hongyu and the others play. Isn't it just a game? Why are you all making it such a big deal? Xiao Yulv looked at them with disdain. By the time it was Su Tianji's turn, Xiao Yulv finally began to understand the game. Li Xiaoao's just a little hooligan, how did he manage to find a beautiful wife like Ling as soon as he arrived on the celestial spiritual island? If she is marrying anyone, it should be a handsome man like me. Xiao Yulv thought to himself, I'm so jealous. As a woman who rarely left her palace and stayed in seclusion for decades at a time, Su Tianji played this game with great excitement. What kind of spiritual herb is this? My injuries will quickly recover after I eat it. Games can reveal another side of people. Once she arrived in this world, Su Tianji let herself go. If this happened in the real world, Su Tianji would never reveal her emotions no matter what. At most, she would ask her disciples to retrieve the spiritual herb and study it when she was back. When she encountered the liquor sword immortal and recited the poem the latter wrote, Xiao Yulv froze and thought. Is my aunt really the one controlling Li Xiaoao? When Xiao Yulv saw the poor beggar transforming into the liquor sword immortal, he couldn't help but feel jealous. This master and this shop are the same in how they do stuff. If it were me, I would have immediately kicked out this drunkard and. At this thought, he couldn't help but shiver in fear. The consequences of kicking such a powerful master was. There are too many traps in the game. I need to do more research. After watching Su Tianji play for a while, Xiao Yulv turned his attention to An Huey and Nalan Hongyu scene. After Su Tianji entered the game, she realized that this lifelike setting gave the players more than just sword techniques and martial arts skills. In the Peach Blossom region was a Peach Blossom hut. Inside the Peach Blossom hut was a Peach Blossom Immortal. The Peach Blossom Immortal planted peach blossom trees. Then, the peach blossoms were picked to sell for wine. He sat before the peach blossom trees when he was sober, and he slept under the peach blossom trees when he was drunk. Half sober, half drunk, day by day. Blossom, wither, year after year. This poem was talking about Suzhou City. Suzhou was a poetic and artistic city surrounded by the fog and rain of the Jiangnan region. The heavens were in the sky and Suzhou and Hangzhou were on the ground. TL note, this is a famous saying in China that describes how beautiful Suzhou and Hangzhou are. The cold mountain temple was outside Gusu, and the sound of bells reached the passenger ships at midnight. Zhang Ji, a famous poet, wrote this everlasting poem during the low point of his life. TL note, Gusu was another name for Suzhou. After killing various demons and monsters, Su Tianji quickly arrived at the first big city in the game Suzhou. The world in the legend of the sword and fairy was similar to the world that she lived in. A lot of warriors and cultivators were walking around. As she played the game, Su Tianji realized why many people liked Ling, who was gentle, pretty and considerate. The night market added hints of joy that enchanted Su Tianji, and the pedestrians walked on the busy streets. The legend of the sword and fairy was completely different from Diablo, where the players focused on finding items, killing bosses and learning different skills. Unlike the real world, Su Tianji felt joy, calm, satisfaction, and passion. The game reflected everything that a person yearned. Perhaps it wasn't as action-packed as the other games, but it exposed all the pleasures of the world and the beauty of individuals. This game was so mesmerizing that those feelings lingered in the players' minds. When playing games, the best state of mind was to forget about training and cultivation. Rather than fussing over levels and skills, the players should stop what they were doing and enjoy the game wholeheartedly. Ling, you're so cute. Let me buy you some sweets. Su Tianji felt relaxed as she immersed herself into this lifelike game and enjoyed this rare, peaceful time. These accessories are really pretty. Ling, try them on. This hairpin is really pretty too, try it. Ling, the floral lights are really pretty too. Although Su Tianji missed the point of the game, she was having fun. This game is interesting. Su Tianji muttered to herself. The others were playing the Legend of the Sword and Fairy for the cultivation, but she turned it into a dating simulation game. The new shop will open tomorrow, Fang Qi replied emotionlessly. Tomorrow? Liang Shi laughed, I bet expanding the shop will be difficult. Fang Qi shrugged, neither agree with or denying Liang Shi's assumption. Wait, I forgot. Liang Shi slapped his forehead. It may be a difficult task for us, but to that person, it is probably as easy as lifting a finger. The person whom he was referring to was that powerful cultivator that stood behind this internet cafe. Upon hearing this, Fang Qi didn't explain and just nodded his head. At this moment, Zhang Xiaoyu was learning how to cook in the kitchen. When she put her heart into something, Fang Qi felt like this little girl was pretty smart as long as her dirty face didn't betray her when she walked out of the kitchen. Upon seeing her face, Fang Qi couldn't help but chuckle, did you bake yourself as well? Zhang Xiaoyu glared at Fang Qi, she really wanted to take a bite out of him. After a few days of learning, Zhang Xiaoyu mastered quite a few cooking techniques. Fang Qi glanced at the dishes on the table, they didn't look too good, but the smell wasn't bad. Fang Qi reached out and grabbed some green pepper and pork stir-fry with his chopsticks, and Zhang Xiaoyu immediately became nervous. Your promotion and raise will depend on this, Fang Qi said as he took a bite. What's promotion and raise? Confused, Zhang Xiaoyu asked, how is it? The meat is a little overcooked and the spices aren't evenly distributed. Fang Qi shook his head. Her skills were far from chefs who were paid with crystals. I made this dish according to the cookbook, how can it be overcooked? Zhang Xiaoyu placed her hands on her waist and asked unhappily, how is the seasoning not evenly distributed? Then, she slammed the cookbook onto the table and said, you don't even know how to cook, you're saying this on purpose. If you're not going to eat it, I will. Zhang Xiaoyu said as she moved the dishes to her side. I don't know how to cook. Fang Qi froze. Then, he flipped through Zhang Xiaoyu's cookbook before replying calmly, you need to marinate the meat before stir-frying it. Also, controlling the heat is an art. Even though stir-frying is the most basic cooking skill, it can be divided into raw frying, cooked frying, plain frying, dry frying, soft frying, and more. You also need to decide if you want to cook the ingredients individually or if you should cook them together. The books don't tell you that. Flabbergasted, Zhang Xiaoyu stared at Fang Qi as he patted her head. Keeping learning, I'm going to head over to the other shop and do some cleaning up. Embarrassed, Zhang Xiaoyu felt like crying as she thought, how do you know so much? She had no idea what Fang Qi was talking about, but it felt fancy. Fang Qi was finally ready to open the new shop across the street. It was a decent location for him. He calmly walked over to the other shop, leaving the sad Zhang Xiaoyu behind. He decided to do a little tidying up since Zhang Xiaoyu could take care of things over at the old shop. Then, he thought about his tasks. He currently had two tasks, one was about the legend of the sword and fairy, the other was about learning skills. Both tasks were equally important, but once he could start live streaming, he would probably place emphasis on the first task, at least until he got through to the end of the game. Once he finished the first task, he would be able to focus on leveling up his skills. The next day, both of Fang Qi's shops transformed. Aside from the bedrooms and kitchen, the second floor of his first shop had been transformed. The system was very diligent in its construction, creating a sky bridge between the two shops that were made of similar material. This way, his shops were connected as one. At first glance, one would think that someone built a small bridge on top of the street. The buildings on either side of the street were made with white bricks and black tile, and the bridge in the middle merged with the existing street perfectly, making the area more interesting and livelier. The front walls of Fang Qi 2 shops were made of glass, so it stood out from the other shops. They looked like two gems that were inlaid into a bundle of bricks, giving the buildings a fresh and unique feel. The inside of the shops became more modern as well. For example, each of the shops had a giant screen for live streaming. The computers were arranged differently as well. Because of the extra room, the computers were rearranged from the simple row-to-row formation, making the shop seem more special at the same time. Fang Qi noticed that his system expanded the lounge areas in both shops. All in all, his internet cafe seemed much more spacious than it used to be. The lights were the same. If Fang Qi opened the curtains, the entire cafe would become bright, but the screens would reflect some light. Therefore, he chose to keep the curtains down and rely mainly on indoor lighting. The smaller shop was untouched before. Fang Qi bought the place just in case he needed it in the future. Now, both shops could be put into operation. He now had more than 150 computers. As long as the customers didn't all come at the same time, it would be hard for the place to reach full capacity. After opening his shop, Fang Qi bought some buns to eat. Zhang Xiaoyu had begun eating her own cooking. She ate her breakfast as she glared at Fang Qi and thought, one day, I'm going to make you eat my food until your tongue falls out. Old customers like Song Qingfeng came early in the morning if they didn't have anything else to do. After all, they didn't want to wait in line for so long. If they came late, they would have to wait for a couple of hours before getting to play. When he came today, Song Qingfeng immediately noticed a difference. Sir, why are there fewer computers in here than usual? Fang Qi pointed across the street. Two shops are operating at the same time today. Song Qingfeng followed Fang Qi's finger and saw an almost identical shop across the street. Although the shop wasn't too big, it wasn't a small shop anymore. Curious, Song Qingfeng walked across the street. Both shops were spacious, but only the old shop had a counter and a fridge. Confused, Song Qingfeng came back and asked Fang Qi, no one's going to tend to the other shop? What if someone causes trouble? Fang Qi shrugged. I don't have to be there to punish troublemakers. Song Qingfeng froze for a second as he suddenly remembered those mysterious lightning strikes. You're right, no one has the courage to cause trouble. Trouble. As a new player of the Legend of the Sword and Fairy, the first thing that Su Tianji did when she went back was to practice the sword control technique. She practiced from last night to this morning. With her realm in essence, she could go almost a month without sleep, so staying up all night wasn't too big of a deal. Although both worlds were full of cultivators, the spiritual spells in this world were significantly different from the sword control technique. After all, even warriors could learn the sword control technique. This difference created a direct discrepancy. To cultivators in this world, learning the sword control technique was simple, but it would take a while before they could fly on their swords. In the past, Su Tianji could stay in seclusion cultivation for years at a time. As long as her state of mind was calm, she wouldn't feel bored. However, after practicing the sword control technique for an entire night, she was bored out of her mind. Yesterday, the gentle and cuteling applauded her when she practiced the sword control technique, and Yoru and her competed to see who had better technique. Also, she improved her own techniques by killing monsters in the game. Although her progress in the real world wasn't as fast as Li Xiaoao's, playing the game as Li Xiaoao helped her comprehend the skill much quicker. In the game, she could go shopping and look at floral lights when she was tired of training. She was still bewildered by the fact that she and Ling shopped for almost an hour last night. Now thinking back, she had fun last night. Su Tianji really didn't want to go back to Zhuhua City, but she really wanted to play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. When she thought about how she could improve her own sword control technique while enjoying the game, the urge of going became more pressing than ever. All the factions and sects had sent their congratulations, so I don't have much to do. Should I go right now? Su Tianji muttered to herself while frowning. Su Tianji went back to Tianji Palace and got ready. On her way there, she suddenly stopped in her tracks, thinking, there aren't going to be any seats left. Although she enjoyed the game, she really didn't want to stand in line for hours on end again. We're done with our morning classes. Should we go to Zhuhua City? Just then, two female disciples walked toward her from the other end of the palace. They were quite talented, and Su Tianji often brought them along with her to places. She just took them to the internet cafe yesterday. Why would we go to Zhuhua City? The other disciples asked. To play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. We shouldn't, there are so many people there. We won't have any seats if we go. Why wouldn't there be seats? The smaller girl with a round face said excitedly, a friend of mine at Zhuhua City sent me a message through the communication jade. She said that Origin's Internet Club added 100 more computers, so we don't have to worry about waiting no matter when we go. Really? Of course. The round-faced girl nudged her friend. Let's go. The two disciples discussed and didn't realize that Su Tianji was in front of them until they looked up. Mortified, they immediately bowed down to their master. Fang Qi, Yuexin, what did you just say? Su Tianji had good hearing, she just heard that Origin's Internet Club added 100 computers, and she wanted to confirm. Crap, our master despises disciples who don't focus on studying and cultivation. How could we have discussed games in front of her? One of the disciples thought as her heart sank. Did you just say that Origin's Internet Club added 100 more computers? Su Tianji stared at them with her hazel eyes. Both of them felt like running into a wall, their master heard everything. Crap, we're going to be scolded. I really hope that we don't get punished. They thought. Just then, they heard Su Tianji say, let's go. Go. The female disciples glanced at each other, and Su Tianji nodded. Yes, to Zhuhua City. Why are we going to Zhuhua City? Her disciples were confused. I planned to. Su Tianji was going to say that she wanted to play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy, but she didn't want to be a bad influence on her disciples. Therefore, she put her hands behind her back and said, I've learned a lot from the sword control technique and would like to further cultivate my skills there. Weren't you two planning to go as well? Yes. Her disciples nodded. We were going to further our studies of the sword control technique as well. Then, they heaved a sigh of relief. Now, we finally have a good excuse to go play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy. It was pretty late when the three of them arrived at the internet cafe. Upon entering, they immediately noticed the difference in layout. The thing that stood out the most was a giant screen on the wall. They saw a bunch of people staring and pointing at it. Confused, Su Tianji looked at the big screen and asked, "What's this for?" "It's for live streaming," a familiar voice suddenly sounded beside her. Su Tianji turned her head and frowned. "Xiao Yulv? Why are you here again?" She understood why others came, but Xiao Yulv could neither play the games nor eat the food here. He could watch, but that was about it. So why would he come? Xiao Yulv was feeling sad. It was fine when not a lot of people came to this internet cafe. But right now, all his friends were playing. Even if he wanted to do something else, he had no one to go with. All his good friends were playing on their computers. After all, this new form of entertainment was both high-end and novel to these wealthy young masters. The games at this internet cafe were the only topics of discussion among the people he knew. Those who didn't play barely got the chance to speak. Therefore, Xiao Yulv had no choice but to come again. Since he couldn't play, he could at least watch. This way, he would be able to contribute to conversations. However, this was an embarrassing thing to admit, and Xiao Yulv felt awkward at Su Tianji's question. Upon seeing Xiao Yulv's expression, Su Tianji changed the subject and pointed to the giant screen. "What's a live stream?" Xiao Yulv came earlier than Su Tianji. Since he couldn't play, he had time to ask around and get some answers. They all like watching the owner play, so he got a giant screen so that others could watch him. "Ha, what's so fun about watching others play?" The Yinlong elder heard their conversation as he walked in with his disciples. He didn't understand why others liked watching. As soon as he finished his sentence, someone in the crowd cried out, "Oh my god, is that the Shu Mountain faction? Why is the Shu Mountain faction constructed in the sky? It's so grand. That must be where immortals live." Then, they suddenly saw strings of words appearing on top of the screen, entering from one end of the screen and exiting from the other. "Please call me a disciple of the Shu Mountain faction. Friends across the street, are you watching? Why are there words on the screen?" Su Tianji and the others became more confused than ever. TL note, just like Twitch chat, the live streaming platforms in China can also display the comments real-time on the scene via bullet screen or bullet comments. "It's a bullet screen. Bullet screen," An Cheng said as he demonstrated. "It's actually pretty interesting. Once you send it out, it will appear on the screens of both shops." Then, he sent the message, "The Shu Mountain faction is really cool." The others quickly saw the same words floating across the big screen in front of them. An Cheng continued, "It's completely anonymous. As long as you don't curse, you can send whatever you want." "Ha! No matter how cool it is, it's still not real." Unconvinced, the Yinlong elder crossed his arms. To him, no matter how real something seemed in the game, it was still not real at the end of the day and completely unreachable. "About that," An Cheng whispered, "if we can use the sword control technique in the game, why can't we create a floating mountain?" An Cheng really wanted to recreate a floating mountain so that could turn Zhuhua into a floating city in the future. The Yinlong elder was at a loss for words. Is that really possible? If we can really create floating cities, then every single faction and sect will float in the sky in the future. Then, the Yinlong elder secretly sent the message, "The Shu Mountain faction is awesome." Then, he glanced left and right. As expected, no one knew that he was the sender. Of course, what they didn't know was that if they could comprehend Pangu's powers, they would become immortals, let alone create a floating city. TL note, Pangu was the first living being and the creator of all things in some versions of Chinese mythology. Although Fang Qi system created such cities, it didn't mean that cultivators in this world could study it and mimic it. What a function! Is it free to send messages? The round-faced female disciple standing behind Su Tianji really wanted to try it out, but she was worried about spending money because everything in this shop costed a lot of crystals. Of course, An Cheng explained, it's just some words, why would it cost you? Really? The two female disciples jumped up in joy and each sent a message onto the live stream screen. People in this world hadn't been exposed to the internet nor information technology, so their thoughts were pure. Therefore, the messages they sent were polite and sophisticated, unlike the ones that Fang Qi was used to seeing on Earth. I can do that. Su Tianji gave it a try as well. She sent, Ling is adorable. As she expected, she saw the same comment floating across the screen. However, she didn't think that her message would create a giant surge of comments. Wow! I think Ling is adorable as well. I found someone with the same taste as me. I love Ling. Me too. Sir, you have to save Ling, or else I'm going to smash this shop. Su Tianji read the rows and rows of comments on the screen and was astonished to see so many people agreeing with her. This seems interesting. Is it really free? Xiao Yulv immediately asked again. An Cheng's lips twitched. Did you see any of us paying? I'm going to send one as well. Xiao Yulv immediately took out his communication jade. This shop may not welcome him, but at least it was free to comment. Then, he followed An Cheng's instructions and sent out a comment using his communication jade. However, why isn't it on the screen? Xiao Yulv looked at the screen in bewilderment before sending out another message. Nothing. He sent a couple more, but all of his comments disappeared into thin air. Why can't I send a message? Xiao Yulv jumped up in fury. Everyone around him was speechless, and Su Tianji said, less talking, more watching. An Cheng sighed in relief, happy that he wasn't on the blacklist. Let's go buy some Häagen-Dazs. Just then, the round-faced disciple behind Su Tianji suggested. Sure. The taller disciple, Fang Qi, immediately nodded as she thought back at the delicious taste that she experienced yesterday. They were here already, so might as well buy another one. Wait, what's Häagen-Dazs? Xiao Yulv got a bad feeling about this. A delicious snack, the two female disciples quickly came back and handed Su Tianji a container. They were going to wait a while before playing, so they watched the live stream while enjoying the delicious ice cream. Su Tianji appeared composed, but Feng Qi and Yuexin looked like they were having the best time of their lives. Xiao Yulv couldn't help but lick his lips. What does it taste like? Is it really that good? Sister Feng Qi, can you give me a try? Although he didn't smell the ice cream, he saw their satisfied faces, and his mouth began to water. No. Feng Qi immediately moved away from him and said sternly, men and women must keep a distance, how can I give you my food to eat? Then, Xiao Yulv immediately looked at Yuexin with a sad expression. No, the owner said that we're not allowed to share food, or else he'll kick us out and never welcome us back. Lastly, he looked at his aunt, Su Tianji. However, the latter didn't even say anything, she walked right up to the screen to watch the live stream. Xiao Yulv felt like crying. Upon seeing his depressed expression, An Cheng, the Yinlong elder, and the others shivered as a single thought crossed their minds, I'm glad that I never caused trouble here. An Cheng reminded Xiao Yulv, although you can't eat Häagen-Dazs, you can still watch the owner play. Let's sit here, it's actually really interesting to watch him play. You're right. Xiao Yulv took in a deep breath. He can't kick me out for watching the live stream. Therefore, he continued watching the other play, eat ice cream, and send messages. With the live stream and bullet screen, the discussions within the internet cafe lessened. After all, the players in both shops could see the bullet comments on the screen. While eating Häagen-Dazs, Su Tianji watched Fang Qi play. However, she had no idea where in the game he was at. Soon, someone sent a bullet comment, "Where's the owner at?" Another person quickly replied, "He arrived at the Shu Mountain faction and is about to go and save Ling. Just thinking about it is making me excited." Shocked, Su Tianji stared at the big screen and wondered, "Look at the discussion." The Yinlong elder who was standing behind her froze for a second as well. "I randomly sent a message, I can't believe that someone replied so quick." There were more than 100 people at the internet cafe, half of which were watching Fang Qi play. Moreover, they were all passionate about this game, so every question was answered. Just then, Yinlong elder and the others heard someone shout, "The liquor immortal spell." Then, discussions erupted as the live stream screen was filled with rows and rows of bullet comments. "The liquor sword immortal is teaching Li Xiaoao the liquor immortal spell. I can tell from the name that it's a powerful spell. Everything the liquor sword immortal taught Li Xiaoao in the past has been amazing. Stop sending bullet comments, he's starting." Everyone watching sat up in their chairs, turning their attention to the screen before them. However, through the liquor sword immortal's words, the viewers could feel the immense power of this spell. It can only be used 9 times in one's lifetime? No wonder the liquor sword immortal isn't willing to use it, and Chang cried out. If someone like him can only use it 9 times in his life, how powerful do you think the spell is? I didn't think that such a weird spell existed. Su Tianji couldn't take her eyes off the screen. Being able to learn such a powerful spell means that this journey is going to be treacherous, right? Everyone looked down upon Li Xiaoao in the beginning of the game. He didn't have power, status, or anything extraordinary. Some players even wanted to give up on the game. To their surprise, he became an alpha male in the blink of an eye. They were witnesses to his growth. That was why they came to sympathize his experience. Will I experience this later in the game as well? Su Tianji finally finished eating her Häagen-Dazs, and she thought as she stared at the screen. The game looks so hard, the female disciple, Yuexin, muttered to Fenghua quietly, "What if we can't save Ling? It's giving me a headache. I bet our master can save her." Fenghua took this opportunity to flatter Su Tianji. "Of course I can." Su Tianji thought haughtily upon hearing her disciple's discussion. "Master, there's a seat over there. Are you going to play the game?" Hongling Feng asked the Yinlong elder. The Yinlong elder glanced over at the computer before turning his attention back to the big screen. He stroked his silver beard and said, "I'm going to watch a little longer." Didn't you say that it is boring to watch others play?" Hongling Feng scratched his head. The Yinlong elder didn't respond as he suppressed the urge to hit his favorite disciple on the head with his cane. Then, he snorted and went back to watching the live stream. In the scene, Li Xiaoao and Lin Yuru were headed toward the Devil Locking Tower. The Shu Mountain faction is horrible. They locked up Ling in a tower. The two of them can go in but won't be able to come out. The faction master is stupider than the disciples. He's so stubborn. Why do all demons and monsters have to be locked up? If a cultivator suddenly stopped talking midway because he realized that the relationship between people and demons in their world wasn't that good either. However, why was he so infuriated by what he saw? Let's cheer Xiaoao on. Lan Yan and Nalan Mingxia were watching the live stream from the last row. Lan Yan held her communication jade tightly, and the follow words appeared on the screen, "You can do it, Xiaoao." Nalan Mingxia had just finished eating her Häagen-Dazs. She put the container down, took out her communication jade, and sent, "You can do it, Xiaoao. Let's cheer Xiaoao on as well." Su Zixin and Shen Qingqing sent bullet comments as well. We can do this." Fenghua and Yuexin saw the comments on the screen and picked up their jades as well. "Let's cheer him on as well, you can do it, Xiaoao." Although Su Tianji didn't say anything, she was still worried to see Li Xiaoao walking into the Devil Locking Tower. Since the bullet comments were anonymous, she sent, "Xiaoao, save Ling soon. Then, she glanced around and realized that no one knew it was her, just as she expected. Hey, let's send comments too, Buletin Che and Yu Yang Cheng ran up to An Cheng and said. As they watched the many comments appearing on the screen, the crowd felt calmer than ever, as if Li Xiaoao could really save Ling now. Of course, none of them knew what bullet comment protection meant. Almost everyone here played The Legend of the Sword and Fairy, so even though the screen was from the third-person point of view, they all felt like they were watching Li Xiaoao walk into the looming demon-locking tower from the first-person point of view. Fang Qi had almost mastered the sword control technique and showed everyone how powerful the Shu Mountain faction's sword techniques were. When he raised his sword, it howled into the sky and attacked like the raindrops in a storm. This wasn't a dream anymore. Li Xiaoao could fully exert the power of the sword control technique. Whoa, he's so powerful! The crowd gasped as they watched many sword shadows kill all the demons and monsters. Upon seeing this, Nalan Hongyu thought back at his youth where he battled enemies and smiled. His demeanor is similar to mine when I was young. Yuoru's 7-star sword energy is so powerful. All the female characters in The Legend of the Sword and Fairy were extremely powerful. When the crowd saw gusts of sword energies dash out of Yuoru's sword, they began sending bullet comments showing their support for her. Yuoru, you're so strong. I love you, Yuoru. Yuoru, you can do it. Song Qingfeng and the others were fans of Ling, but even they couldn't help but exclaim, no wonder she's the daughter of the Master of Martial Arts Alliance, this sword energy is amazing. They watched in awe as Xiaoao and Yuoru experienced countless dangers to save Ling. For one, they didn't expect to see so many horrific demons in the tower, none of the monsters were easy to defeat. Second of all, they were shocked by the fact that the two really made it this far. However, upon seeing the prison-guarding Wisdom King standing in Li Xiaoao's way, the crowd didn't know whether to be surprised to angry. The Shu Mountain faction's demon-locking tower is protected by a real god. How is that possible? It's just a mortal faction, why would this tower be protected by a god? They were all flabbergasted. The faction was floating in the sky, and its demon-locking tower was protected by a real god. What else? The Shu Mountain faction is so powerful. The crowd was as shocked as they could be. How is Li Xiaoao supposed to win? The crowd groaned in despair, it was impossible for a mortal to defeat a god. However, when Li Xiaoao began chanting a spell, they all snapped back from their initial shock. Someone shouted, he's chanting the Liquor Immortal spell. Finally, all the true energy that Fang Qi had been storing up could finally be used at a time like this to activate the Liquor Immortal spell. Ling. Look at Ling. Ling is a descendant of Nuwa. She has godly powers. Everyone watching the live stream sat there with their jaws open, dumbstruck. TL note, a goddess in Chinese mythology. Nuwa, also known as the Queen of Wa, is a clan lord from the ancient times who was gradually regarded as the ancestor of human beings. Spiritual energy gathered together and gushed out like floods. The Liquor Immortal spell was way too powerful when Li Xiaoao, Ling, and Lin Yuoru joined hands, even a god was no match for them. Everyone knew it was only a game, but they were still shocked. When the three of them defeated the prison-guarding Wisdom King after the hard battle, every viewer in the internet cafe bursted into cheers. They were even more excited when they watched the three of them flee from the tower after breaking the dragon column in the demon decomposing pond. Are they finally coming out? Look! Our Ling is so strong. Soon, this bullet comment appeared on the screen. For Ling's fans, they felt sad when they witnessed that an ordinary girl of a mysterious background was labeled as a demon. However, she had awakened her godly power as a descendant of a god. Our Yuoru is just as powerful. Among the relatively harmonious comments on the screen, there was still some rivalry. Immediately, lots of bullet comments showed on the screen. Ling is both pretty and powerful. Ling is gentle and sweet. They triggered many supporting messages. Seeing that the powerful enemy had been defeated, Yoru's fans began to relax and fight back. Yoru is cuter. Yoru is more passionate. Of course, these bullet comments came from the younger people. Senior masters such as Su Tianji just stood among the crowd, not caring to join the argument. Meanwhile, Feng Hua and Yuexin finished their comments and hurried over to her, asking, "Master, who do you like more, Ling or Yoru?" Su Tianji didn't know what to say. She wanted to say that she liked both of them. Right now, only a few had noticed that Xiaoao and Ling were fatigued after their battle with prison-guarding Wisdom King. After all, it was quite unthinkable to challenge a god with the strength of mortals, and it was impossible for them to show no exhaustion after defeating the god. At this moment, the devil-locking tower collapsed. Everyone blanked out instantly. It wasn't an interlude animation, but everyone felt sad inside after watching the battles with the ordinary demons, Zhongqing, Ghost King, the prison-guarding Wisdom King, and the 9 dragons transformed by the dragon column. They had experienced hardship along the journey as if they had been inside the game. It showed the true power of love since Li Xiaoao even killed the real god. With the aid of the spiritual bead, it was the ultimate power that the mortals could unleash. Maybe after many years, they would still remember the 7-star sword energy blooming on the screen and the figure who stood in front of others at the risk of death. Yoru's decision at that moment showed everyone her true feelings from the bottom of her heart. TL note, in the game, Lin Yoru blocked a giant rock for Li Xiaoao and Ling. Then, it was all buried in the ruins. For a long time, no one could speak. Silence. No one knew how long had passed when a comment appeared on the screen. "Don't die." In the next moment, the comments filled the screen. "Woo! Don't let anything happen to you." Feng Hua and Yuexin tried to hold back their tears. Couldn't Xiaoao be more powerful? Zhang Xiaoyu covered her face, crying. "Where is the power that you showed when you used the liquor immortal spell? Damn it! Don't let anyone die." Song Qingfeng and others had moved to the seats in the back as if they were afraid to see things that they couldn't accept. "It's the owner who's playing. Don't you trust him?" An Cheng and others were also nervous, and their eyes were red with tears. "It has nothing to do with the owner." Fatty Wu Yangcheng inhaled deeply and said, shaking his head, "It's beyond the power of mortals." The Yinlong elder, who had been complaining of boredom, heaved a heavy sigh. "Let's wait for the outcome." Due to various reasons, Fang Qi split the last part of the Legend of the Sword and Fairy into 2 days, which was why many people had to wait for the second day to continue watching the game. On the second day, Fang Qi realized that more people came into the cafe, and all of them, no matter if they played the Legend of the Sword and Fairy or not, wanted to watch the last part of the live stream to see if Yoru could be revived and the ending for Ling and Xiaoao. By going to Nanzhao with Ling, it was the end of Li Xiaoao's mission. Li Xiaoao's strength had grown little by little on his journey, from the Fire Kirin Cave to the Trial Cave. When Li Xiaoao finally woke up Ling, it was the time for the final battle. "I didn't expect that there would be such a powerful enemy behind all of this. He is Baiyu of Nanzhao. How come I feel like he is more powerful than the prison-guarding Wisdom King who guarded the devil-locking tower?" Baiyu's shadow was imprinted in almost everyone's mind. The water demon beast and Baiyu merged and became one, and it caused huge waves which flooded a large piece of land and many houses. The horrifying power that it showed was invincible. Some people had never thought that they would laugh and cry for an imaginary person in a game. However, when they watched Ling dash forward with all her force onto the mountain like snake-bodied Baiyu who had merged with the water demon beast, they changed their mind. They had started the game with the intentions of learning martial arts and spells. But at this moment, they were all touched. In fact, the Legend of the Sword and Fairy was classic not because it showed the audience the destruction of beautiful things. After all, pure tragedies only brought people sadness. This game was trying to show that true and valuable feelings existed in this filthy world. It was something that everyone longed for but couldn't obtain. The beauty of the game touched hidden feelings in many people's hearts. Without a word, Fang Qi put down the virtual headset and looked at the sincere eyes around him. For the people who lived in this world, they were touched by true love since they were free from the influences of all kinds of cultures. Perhaps they were thinking that it would be worth all the fortune in their lives if they could have such true love. At the end of the story, Nu played the flute to see off Xiaoao on a snowy day, and Yoru, who had finally been revived, was waiting for Xiaoao's return, holding an umbrella. Everyone watched this scene with tears in their eyes. TL note, at the end of the game, Ling sacrificed herself to kill the water demon beast. Seeing the scenes on the screen, they immediately remembered all the events in the game that made them laugh, cry, and feel curious. Also, they thought back to when they first learned the sword control technique and the excitement of killing the prison-guarding Wisdom King in the devil-locking tower. It seemed like a life cycle had passed. They felt as if they had lived another life in the game. Nalan Hongyu sighed faintly. Despite his old age, he still couldn't completely see through life, and ripples rose in his mind. Perhaps this is why I have stopped at the current realm, he thought. The Yinlong Elder, and Huawei, and others were also lamenting. They had played the game due to various reasons, but now they had all grown to like the people and things in the game. The Liquor Sword Immortal's wild elegance, Ling's vivaciousness, Yoru's bravery, and Xiaoao's fate all touched them to their cores. They even felt like the people in the game lived a more meaningful life than their own. Even though these people only existed in the game, they were real people in the viewers' hearts. The only regret was that Ling didn't return with Li Xiaoao and Lin Yoru. Woo! Why did Ling end up like this? Remembering the moment that Ling died, Zhang Xiaoyu began to cry again. Many female players began to wipe tears from their eyes secretly. My Ling, someone howled in the internet cafe. If it happened at another time, not only Fang Qi, but the others would have cussed that person. But today, others joined the howling immediately. Looking at the people who were howling in the internet cafe, Fang Qi was at a loss for words. At this moment, Fang Qi glanced at his tasks. Introduce the legend of the sword and fairy to 300 people and make them feel touched by the story. Task progress 40/300 task reward, Counter-Strike, virtual reality remake task description, N/A only a small part of the task was left. After looking around the internet cafe, Fang Qi knew that a group of new players would soon join the game. More importantly, despite the unchangeable main plot, there could be more than one ending. Fang Qi had made the discovery while he played. Even though he had gotten an ending close to the official version, it was hard to say that other players couldn't get other plots and endings. After finishing the game, Fang Qi continued to do his task. Right now, he had already mastered the sword control technique and was proficient at the thousand sword technique, which was used quite often. As to the drunken immortal moon observing steps and heavenly sword that he had learned later, he was familiar with them and needed time to get more proficient with them. Therefore, Fang Qi turned off the live stream and began to practice his skills. However, with the number of players in the Origin Internet Club growing, some people felt threatened. Without a doubt, Pang Ruli of the Qin Mountain Beast Garden was one of them. Pang Ruli had begun to sense the threat ever since the customers began to thin in the Qin Mountain Beast Garden, and the sense of danger had grown more obvious now. Before, he knew nothing about the business of the Origin Internet Club or the so-called games. Now, the sense of danger grew stronger inside him when he heard the aristocrats talking about a game named The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. When he learned what kind of game The Legend of the Sword and Fairy was from his spies, a smart man like him knew what it meant. If the situation continued, it would bring a great impact to the entire entertainment industry in Zhuhua City. Copy the business? Impossible. Who would spend so much money on making spiritual artifacts for the customers to play? Also, who had the power to create a small world for others to play in? Who could copy this business mode? Despite his admiration of the owner, Pang Ruli was determined to suppress this shop. After all, he wasn't someone to be messed with, especially when the small shop had begun to threaten his Qin Mountain Beast Garden. He studied the name list in his hand and marked many names with a red pen. It was the list of the first-class businesses in Zhuhua City. The social status of businessmen in this world was not as low as the ancient times in China. For example, it wouldn't be easy for someone to acquire such a large piece of land and many demon beasts, including extremely rare ones, to build the Qin Mountain Beast Garden without an extraordinary background. Pang Ruli's ancestors had been counts. Although the title wasn't passed down, the Pang family had accumulated great power, and he was an official in the city. Likewise, the people on the name list were either powerful aristocrats or people with a big force behind them. If they joined hands, they couldn't be reckoned with. The names that he had marked were people who had agreed to help him, but he still needed 1 to 2 truly powerful figures. Pang Ruli had done his due diligence and knew that some customers who played games in Fang Qi's shop had extraordinary backgrounds. However, they were only customers and not wonders. It meant that the shop couldn't rely on the customers to help it out of trouble. If a shop had to enlist help from its customers, the business would soon be over. Pang Ruli drew a big circle on the name list, and only 2 names were in the red circle. One was the owner behind the Wind and Moon Pavilion, and the other was Huo Chong, the master of the Southern Business Alliance. These 2 are hard to deal with. With the name list in his hand, Pang Ruli was deep in thought. Meanwhile in the Wind and Moon Pavilion, Song Qingfeng was eating in the Wind and Moon Pavilion. In fact, the figures who had some importance in Zhuhua City liked to visit this place whenever they had time. The table that Song Qingfeng and others took had more liquor than usual. "Come on, young Master Song. Bottoms up." Lin Xiao picked up a jar of liquor. Song Qingfeng's face fell and said, "Young Master Lin, you want to bottom up the jar? Shut up. I'm not in the mood today." As a loyal fan of Ling, he felt bad when Yuri returned at the end of the game, but Ling couldn't come back to life. Lin Xiao gulped down a mouthful of liquor and said with a sad face, "We're buddies, and I'm not afraid to humiliate myself in front of you. To tell the truth, when I played the game today and saw Ling again, I wanted to cry." Ever since they began playing Diablo together, they had become friends and had come for a drink together. "Of course, let's drink." Wang Tai froze for a second. He hadn't played The Legend of the Sword and Fairy and had only watched others play it, but he felt the same way as the others. "It's a pity that this liquor isn't nearly as good as Sprite." Song Qingfeng clicked his tongue while he drank. "You won't get drunk with Sprite." With that said, Lin Xiao chugged another mouthful of liquor, and his face turned red. Beside them, many other customers in the Wind and Moon Pavilion had big jars of liquor on the tables in front of them. Even Shen Qingqing, who rarely drank, had ordered a bottle of green jade liquor and took a seat beside a window. Su Zixin sat across from her, and her face didn't change color after drinking 1 bottle of liquor. "I prefer Sprite," Shen Qingqing mumbled. Her face turned pink after drinking only a small bottle of liquor while resting her chin in her hand. Su Zixin looked tipsy as she said, "I wish that the snacks here are as good as Häagen-Dazs and the liquor as good as the Sprite." The waiter who served them looked sulky. He had got tired of hearing Sprite and Häagen-Dazs these days and wondered what they were. It was still okay if someone wanted to compare other things with the liquor and snacks in the Wind and Moon Pavilion, but they criticized the great offers of the Wind and Moon Pavilion while they were eating. It must be noted that the chef of the Wind and Moon Pavilion came from Jingxi, and he was as good as the chefs in the royal palace. Meanwhile, in an exquisite compartment on the 4th floor of the Wind and Moon Pavilion behind the pretty curtain, one could see the vague shape of a woman and her distinct and beautiful features. With her beautiful eyes set deep under her dark eyebrows, she opened her lips and said with pride and elegance, "King He, Wan Yu." Standing before her were a man and a woman who were meticulously dressed. The man was in his 30s and looked righteous. After hearing his name, he led the woman beside him to bow slightly. The woman behind the curtain looked casual with a pot of tea in her hand. "I just came back from Jingxi and can use some rest. What happened these days? Tell me." The man and the woman immediately reported what had happened in the Wind and Moon Pavilion recently. The customers keep commenting that our liquor doesn't taste as good as the Sprite of a small shop. The woman behind the curtain found it ridiculous. Our snacks aren't nearly as good as Häagen-Dazs. She said in contempt, it's just a small shop. The customers can eat whatever they like, what impact can it have on us? Standing outside of Tianji Hall, Su Tianji felt melancholic. It was the night, and the stars blinked brightly in the dark sky. Looking at the shadows beyond the mountains and the stars in the sky, she felt a loneliness that she had never felt before. With a flick of her fingers, a sword flew out and flashed on the sea of flowers outside the hall. Standing in front of the great hall of the Nalan family, Nalan Hongyu squinted his eyes and said slowly, when I was young, people were talking about concentrating on martial arts without distraction. I tried to achieve it most of my life, but is it really so hard to achieve? Standing behind him, Elder Fu remained silent for a long time before answering, Sir, we're old. Nalan Hongyu laughed with regret for his old age and said, Yet. We're old, and we shouldn't focus on martial arts without distraction anymore. Flowers could bloom again, but people couldn't go back to their youth. They should focus their mind on how to enjoy the rest of their lives. Nalan Hongyu heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that it was enough for him to play with plants and flowers and entertain himself with leisure activities at this stage of his life. Compared to concentrating on martial arts without distraction, I prefer being calm and peaceful like water, he thought. After spending so much time on battles and wars, Nalan Hongyu now preferred a peaceful life. Standing in her courtyard full of pear trees, Nalan Mingxiu looked distracted while she stared at the trees. Ms. Nalan, are you sad as well? Lan Yan was wiping her tears with a handkerchief. No. Nalan Mingxiu looked back with the moonlight shining on her charming face as she asked, Lan Yan, what do you think of the game in Mr. Fang's shop? It's great, Lan Yan answered even though she was puzzled by this question. Although the worlds in the last two games look weird, they were quite novel, and I wonder who came up with such ideas. As to the legend of the sword and fairy, the world that it describes is similar to ours. But instead of feeling bored, I felt like it is quite a classic. Then, do you like it? Of course. Lan Yan got excited when this topic was brought up. Speaking of that, I especially like the legend of the sword and fairy. Yet, Nanlan Mingxiu lowered her head and said, the people and techniques in the game are interesting, and everyone likes it, so, it's not good. Why is it not good with everyone liking it? Lan Yan was baffled. It's simple, Nanlan Mingxiu said with good logic, while Mr. Fang's business is prospering, someone will get jealous. Although he doesn't have any direct competition, he has rivals who are displeased that he is taking away their customers. Mr. Fang is only an ordinary man, but now his business seems to have the potential to surpass those of the aristocrats. In short, he will face many challenges. Even with that mysterious cultivator sitting in his shop, he can't solve all the problems. Nalan Mingxiu pointed her finger at Lan Yan's chest, saying, human hearts and minds are complicated. More importantly, I'm afraid that many people are greedy over the spiritual artifacts which are called computers and want to take them from him. These people can't do anything serious separately, but I'm afraid someone will unite them into a force. Southern Business Alliance. There were business people in every world, so was this world that was full of cultivators and warriors. The spiritual artifacts and elixir pills that cultivators wanted, and the martial arts technique scrolls and the body tempering herbs that the warriors sought had triggered the expansion of commerce and prosperity. A business alliance which could expand and strengthen industries and satisfy the needs of the high-level cultivators and powerful warriors was certainly extraordinary. Huo Chang was a thin middle-aged man, and he was wearing a stylish robe. He was also a cultivator with powerful essence. Sitting in front of his desk, his eyes squinted while he read the letter in his hand. Pang Ruli. Huo Chang is a guy who won't show his hand unless there's a big reward for him. While blowing out a puff of white smoke, Pang Ruli said slowly, if this small shop is indeed what it seems, he wouldn't make a move. However, this guy has many spies, and I'm afraid that he got wind of it earlier than us. Pang really smirked. In fact, he has been craving for the stuff in this small shop. He just doesn't dare to reach out his hand. Now that such a good opportunity presented itself, I'm sure he will join us as long as the reward is big enough. Pang really sneered as he said. Meanwhile, the Wind and Moon Pavilion got even more crowded than usual, and most of the customers had come here for liquor. Young Master Jet, how come you're in the mood to have a drink with us today? Yao Xiaoang's father was an aristocrat with moderate influence and had an official title in Zhuhua City. Although his position was far lower than people like in Cheng, he had some influence in the city. As the son of an official, Yao Xiaoyang had some buddies, but he had never been invited by Zhou Zhe to have liquor in the Wind and Moon Pavilion together with a large group of people. About 10 people sat around the table, and Yao Xiaoyang was quite familiar with most of them. I say, young Master Zhe, did anyone piss you off, and you want us to give him a lesson? The young man in black who was sitting at a seat asked with a laugh, but you don't need so many of us to do such a simple task, right? Yao Xiaoyang was also curious. After all, a few young men with some influence were enough to give someone a lesson, it didn't need a large group of people. I asked all of you to come here because I found something really fun, the young man sitting at the head of the table said. Really fun? Dice? Cards? Or, a young man sitting to the right said with a snicker, the top girl in the drunken red pavilion. Or, some new demon beasts in Qin Mountain Beast Garden. A young man waved his folding fan as his eyes emitted a cold light, which meant that his strength was greater than his peers. What in the world is so fun that young Master Zhe called us to this place at this late hour? Yao Xiaoyang looked unconvinced. Although the world respected strength, not everyone was diligent enough to work one's way to the top. One could only achieve a high realm after hard practice, but it was too much to ask from these rich young men. Only a few had the fortitude and talent to gain great strength. Of course, most of them only wanted to be rich playboys, and they didn't care if people called them ignorant or good for nothing. As a new player of the Legend of the Sword and Fairy, Zhou Zhe had been drawn into the game by a friend. TL note, in ancient China, people can add the title, Young Master, before the first name or the last name. That is why Zhou Zhe is referred to as Young Master Zhe while Song Qingfeng is referred to as Young Master Song. He was hooked by the game the first time he tried it, not expecting that he could experience another legendary life by playing a game. More importantly, the story was so classic that he couldn't get enough of it and wanted to share it with the people he knew. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. Have you heard of it before? None of young men had expected Zhou Zhe to gather them here to have fun instead of asking them for a favor. It always felt better to share the fun. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy. They all shook heads. What's so good about it? Why do you want to recommend it to us? In fact, beside their table, many other customers of the Wind and Moon Pavilion were also talking about the same thing while they drank. The atmosphere was livelier than before. Meanwhile, Fang Qi was oblivious to what was happening far away. Sitting in front of the computer, he watched the screen in which gentle breeze created ripples on the west lake that was as smooth as a mirror. In the game, Li Xiaoao stood calmly on the surface of the lake with his finger pointing at the sky. Around him, the green waves surged up while the water plants moved under his aura even though there was no wind. Boundless spiritual essence surged toward the direction that he was pointing at, and the things that were either with or without shape, visible or invisible around him moved. Instantly, he condensed a huge spiritual essence sword. Heavenly Sword. Based on the sword control technique, it was also a sword technique of the Shu Mountain faction, but it was much powerful than the basic sword control technique. On the screen, Li Xiaoao waved his finger, and the huge sword that was condensed from spiritual essence crashed into the lake like a huge meteor. The overwhelming pressure released from the spiritual essence created a huge crater on the lake surface before it touched the water. Then, the huge sword crashed into the lake and instantly created giant waves as if water poured from the skies. Countless water drops fell from the sky like a storm. Allowing the water drops to fall on his shoulders, Fang Qi exhaled with dissatisfaction. Still not good enough, no matter if the technique could be used in the real world or not, he couldn't say he had mastered it if he couldn't use it proficiently in the game. It was obvious that Fang Qi had difficulty in controlling the huge amount of spiritual essence even in the game. I must put more effort into my granular control and get more familiar with the initiation of the heavenly sword. It won't take long, Fang Qi thought. When he finished the game, he had mastered most of the techniques. However, the heavenly sword technique was so complicated that it had cost him lots of time even in the game. He did the calculation and found that the task would be mostly done if he mastered the heavenly sword. Then he glanced at the task of touching Legend of the Sword and Fairy and found the process had gained another 30 by this time. With the game getting more popular, he guessed the mission would be finished in a couple of days. In his mountain mansion, Pang Ruli opened his mouth and blew out a puff of smoke while the end of his tobacco pipe glowed. Obviously, he was waiting for something. Despite his previous confidence, he needed some confirmation. At this moment, a maid strode into the room. "Master, here's the reply to your letter." While he flipped through the ancient scrolls on the desk, he said, "I'll make a move when the reward is big enough. However, Pang Ruli is asking for a favor from me this time, and we can't agree to his request so readily. What shall we do?" The young man standing before the desk asked, "Dad, haven't we been making plans to deal with the small shop?" Just as Pang Ruli said, the unique small shop owned all kinds of novel games and had a mysterious cultivator guarding it. In fact, Huo Chong had monitored that shop for some time now. After Xiao Yulv was tossed out for the first time, Huo Chong sent some spies to the shop to test the waters. Even if the cultivator in the shop doesn't make a move, the small shop wouldn't be easy to deal with, Huo Chong said mildly. Otherwise I wouldn't have waited for so long. Do you mean we should decline the invitation? The young man asked in bafflement. Decline? Why decline? Huo Chong chuckled. Then gains, Huo Chong said with a smile, there are still gains. Since he asked me for a favor, we can ask for a reward. If the reward is big enough, we can join him. The maid handed the letter to Pang Ruli and then whispered something into his ear. A bit of elation seemed to cross Pang Ruli's face. What did you say? Pang Ruli slapped his hands on his thighs and stood up from his chair, laughing. Did you say that someone got drunk in the Wind and Moon Pavilion and threw up on the shoes of the owner? If it happened to Pang Ruli, a crude man, he would have beaten that person so that the latter wouldn't be able to feel to his limbs, let alone the fact that the owner of the Wind and Moon Pavilion was a woman. Right. The maid also looked pleased. More importantly, the drunken customer seemed to have just finished playing a game in the Origin Internet Club. It made the owner vent her anger on all the customers who had talked about that game and were drinking there. They were all kicked out. There were many players who had talked about the games in the Wind and Moon Pavilion. Ever since Häagen-Dazs and Sprite appeared in Fang Qi's shop, the customers tended to compare these two new things with the liquor and snacks in the Wind and Moon Pavilion. It didn't matter if the owner of the establishment was confident or not, she would be displeased when the customers kept comparing her top-tier liquor and snacks with those in a small shop that was owned by a civilian. This incident of someone vomiting on her shoes was like pouring gas on the fire. It is God-sent gift. Pang Ruli's eyes lit up at the news. He would take advantage of this incident for sure. Even if the Wind and Moon Pavilion didn't ally with him, it would be hostile toward Fang Qi's small shop. Pang Ruli had thought that the best he could do was enlisting Huo Chong's help at some cost. However, the situation turned out to be better than he had expected. Moody, drinking, and throwing up. You are a good actor. In his courtyard, Ji Wei played with a bronze wine cup in his hand. He always looked calm because he was the mastermind behind the scene and didn't need to get his hands dirty. Indeed, most of the customers of Fang Qi's shop got moody and went to the Wind and Moon Pavilion for a drink. It was nothing unusual. With so many people drinking, it was natural that one or two of them would get drunk and throw a tantrum. "It's a piece of cake," the person in the dark said mildly. Of course, it wasn't a coincidence, someone just took advantage of the situation. There will be some commotion among them. Ignore them while we take advantage of the situation to do our thing. Ji Wei drank up the wine in the cup. The fuel that he had dumped on the fire was enough. Achoo! Achoo! Fang Qi put down the virtual headset and sneezed repeatedly. "Who's talking about me?" Fang Qi stretched and found that it was almost time to close the shop. When he walked to the counter, he saw the lowly putting her head on her arms. Fang Qi knocked on the desk, saying, "You're not supposed to sleep during work hours, or I'll deduct your pay." Zhang Xiaoyu immediately raised her head, and her teary eyes looked at Fang Qi morosely while all her face was wet. Fang Qi froze for a while. "Hey, it is just a game. You only watched and didn't even play. How could it affect you so much?" "One day, I'll play it," Zhang Xiaoyu said with a pout. "Then, you must work harder to get paid more from your boss." Fang Qi pointed to the shop across the street and said, "Now that we expanded, you can clean the other shop. Wash your face and get started now." Zhang Xiaoyu was at a loss for words. "Are all the human bosses as cunning as you?" Zhang Xiaoyu walked across the street, finding it hard to get along with Fang Qi. After spending the whole day playing the game, Fang Qi felt a bit tired. However, he had mastered more techniques after the intense battles and training, and he was able to use more skills in the real world as well. Flying on a sword, Fang Qi looked out of the shop and at the sky. The world was vast, and he only saw a tiny corner of it. He had only seen a small part of the city and just heard about the neighboring Yanhai city from Yeziao and the others, let alone the Liu Yundaist Palace, the factions in the South Sea, Jingxi, or places that were even more distant. His knowledge about warriors was limited to the Ling Yun Academy and the big families. As to the levels of the warriors, he still didn't know what realm Nalan Hungwu was in. An expanding shop was all he had. At this moment, Fang Qi began to understand why some people wished to tour around the world. However, it was no use to dwell on the wishful thoughts, he must concentrate on the present. While cleaning the shop, Fang Qi knew exactly what he should do. Yawning, Fang Qi murmured to himself with heavy eyelids, "Well, it's time for a good sleep after practicing techniques for a whole day." For the people in this world, they could draw many parallels. For the explosive bombs in the game, there were explosive spiritual artifacts in this world. In the understanding of the people in this world, they believed that guns were an extension to crossbows and arrows. Despite the seemingly miraculous power of these special spiritual artifacts, they were within the scope of knowledge of the people here after they understood the mechanisms. The only difference was that guns were in fact not spiritual artifacts since they didn't need any energy to activate them, which meant that anyone could use them. Compared with immortal extinguish crossbows and other similar spiritual artifacts, guns had an advantageous feature. Ever since Resident Evil got popular, many players had noticed this advantageous feature of these special weapons, and some of them had even tried to make them in the real world. However, due to the differences and gaps in cultures and thinking, they all failed. Most of them failed in the handling of the details. In short, even in the world of cultivators, it wasn't as easy as one might think to imitate the mature gun-making procedures. Even though some copies were made, the products were so inferior that they couldn't be shown to the public. Some even had the danger of implosion. Gradually, some even suspected that it was impossible to imitate the guns to perfection. Of course, they were not professional makers. Besides, they didn't know that Fang Qi had a rocket launcher, which few people knew besides the spies who watched Fang Qi Internet Cafe all day long outside of his shop. However, everything had exceptions. Some had imitated guns with a certain degree of success. Some got the inspiration from the mechanisms of guns and had improved the imperfect guns that they made with cultivators' talisman and array formations. Junior Uncle Master Li, this is the spiritual artifact that Ms. Su ordered. In the blue flame pavilion, a stout middle-aged man had a silver-white revolver in his hand. However, this revolver only looked like a revolver gun, its interior structure was totally different. This gun was a copy of the Magnum in Resident Evil, but its bullets were imitated ordinary bullets. From the quality standpoint, they were even worse than the ordinary bullets in the game. However, the surface of the bullets was covered with a layer of weird patterns. Likewise, the surface of the gun had the same patterns on it, showing people that the gun cost a fortune, and it was not a cheaply made ordinary weapon. What do you think of it? Can we mass produce it? Although Li Haoran had never played Resident Evil, he was an experienced gamer and knew what guns were. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "It's not possible for now. To make a product of this quality, our artifact masters spent lots of overtime on it, and only one is made until now. With cultivators and their techniques, they could make a few artifacts of this kind. However, without machines and factories, a few artifact masters couldn't mass-produce guns, let alone engraving patterns and array formations onto them." "Ms. Su is here," a female disciple reported. Li Haoran nodded and said, "Take her to the artifact testing room." The moment that Su Zixin saw the power of the rocket launcher, she had asked Fang Qi if it could be produced. Although it was hard to imitate the rocket launcher, guns were relatively easy to make. Su Zixin's eyes lit up when she saw the middle-aged man walking over with the silver revolver in his hands. "You made it." The middle-aged man chuckled. "Ms. Su, this thing cost the Blue Flame Pavilion a fortune. It's quite expensive." "Of course." Su Zixin nodded. The players who had fast progress were familiar with each other. That was why Li Haoran and Su Zixin knew each other. After greeting each other, Su Zixin took the modified handgun into her hand. The middle-aged man brought over 20 bullets that were neatly placed on a platter. The exquisite array patterns on them showed that the price of each bullet would be at least several crystals. Even for Su Zixin, this custom-made gun was a luxury. "Try it," Li Haoran said. He had confidence in his spiritual artifacts shop. Nodding, Su Zixin picked up the gun and placed a bullet into it smoothly. While holding the gun with both hands, she aimed it at a huge black rock dozens of meters away. Although its shape resembled a handgun, it was in fact a spiritual artifact. With air entering the body, the exquisite and tiny patterns on the gun seemed to shine a bit. Then, Su Zixin pulled the trigger. Swoosh! With a sharp air-piercing whistling sound, lights erupted on the huge black rock. When the dust settled, they saw a hole that was as big as a fist in the hard rock. While exhaling slightly, Su Zixin nodded and seemed satisfied with the power of the gun. "Isn't that a gun?" Some cultivators had come to the Blue Flame Pavilion to buy spiritual artifacts, and they happened to see this scene. Was a gun successfully made? They exchanged a look, wondering why the power of the gun was even greater than those used in the Resident Evil. Su Zixin loved new things and would try new items in Fang Qi's shop. For example, the class that she chose in Diablo was Amazon, which no one had ever played before. "After I master the cold arrows, fire arrows, and exploding arrows, I will have my spiritual artifact version of the revolver." "Humph! No, I shall call them ice bullets, fire bullets, and explosive bullets." Su Zixin was very pleased with herself while she imagined the scene in which she used the sword control technique with her left hand and the revolver in her right hand. When she walked into the internet cafe, she saw Fang Qi sitting on a chair while enjoying Häagen-Dazs. "Sir." In a good mood, Su Zixin showed him the silver handgun with a smile. "Ta-da! Isn't it awesome?" It was early morning, and some players were just walking into the shop when they saw the handgun. Exclamations rose immediately. "A Magnum! F***ck! Is it real? They can make them now. It was an object from the game. It was truly awesome." Their exclamations drew the attention of other people in the internet cafe. "It's nothing." While eating Häagen-Dazs, Fang Qi dug out a big thing and placed it before her. Everyone's face twitched as they looked at the rocket launcher. Compared with the rocket launcher, the Magnum handgun was nothing. Ugh! Li Haoran entered the shop at this moment, and he frowned when he saw the rocket launcher that Fang Qi took out. In the entire Zhuhua and even the whole Jiangnan region, the Blue Flame Pavilion was the best at making artifacts. However, with the current abilities of the Blue Flame Pavilion, it could barely make a modified Magnum handgun with passable quality. Making rocket launchers was certainly beyond their abilities. No shop in the entire Zhuhua city and even the whole Jiangnan region had the ability to make such a weapon, unless they enlisted the help of an elder who specialized in making artifacts. "Sir, where did you get it?" Li Haoran was curious. "Is it a fake?" Displeased, Su Zixin picked up the rocket launcher and examined it carefully. The heavy body and the structure details were the same as the weapon in the game. With the rocket launcher in her hands, Su Zixin felt like she was in the game. "Is it real?" Su Zixin looked toward Fang Qi, not willing to accept the truth. "I spent great efforts and a fortune to make a Magnum handgun which is only a knockoff version of the real thing. It has the same exterior but totally different interior design," she thought. However, Fang Qi had casually taken out a rocket launcher, and it was a real thing. Watching from the side, Liang Shi couldn't help asking, "Sir, where did you get it? How come it looks so real?" Liang Shi knew how hard it was to make these things. He and others had spent a fortune on making copies but had no success. Since they couldn't afford to continue spending money, they had given up the idea of imitating the weapons in Resident Evil quickly. That was why he doubted the authenticity of Fang Qi rocket launcher. "What are you doing here in a group?" It was the peak time for business, and Nalan Mingxiu came into the shop and saw the crowd. Therefore, she walked over to them curiously. She knew that the crowd around Fang Qi must be reacting to something novel. "We're discussing if the shop owner's rocket launcher is real or not." Su Zixin spoke for the people around her. "Of course it's real." Lan Yan had seen Fang Qi blowing away an ancestor warrior with the rocket launcher that night, so he said, "Don't you know about the shop owner's skill with guns?" "I know it," Su Zixin said, "but it was in the game, right? Did you forget who owns these games?" Nalan Mingxiu reminded her mildly. After playing games here for a long time, they had regarded Fang Qi Internet Cafe as a shop for games and didn't spare much thoughts on the things in the games. However, at Nalan Mingxiu's reminder, they remembered that the rocket launcher in the game had been created by this shop. "Sir, is this rocket launcher for sale?" Obviously, Li Haoran had his eye on Fang Qi rocket launcher, and he asked immediately after making sure that it was authentic. Hearing his words, the others who intended to ask the same question instantly gave up, knowing that they couldn't afford a price as high as Li Haoran could. Fang Qi shrugged. "All the business that I do is clearly written on the small blackboard. How about a partnership?" Nalan Mingxiu asked casually. Even though she asked, she didn't have high hopes for it. After all, Fang Qi spent almost all his time playing games in his shop. He barely had time to manage his business. Nalan Mingxiu had her plans, but she knew that it was almost impossible to have a successful partnership with a guy like Fang Qi. What kind of partnership? Ugh! Nalan Mingxiu froze, thinking that she had heard him wrong. The reason that Fang Qi agreed to work with her was that he had received a new task. Task: believing in science, spreading the basic knowledge about guns. Task description: participate in the discussions about the basics for at least 3 kinds of guns. Task reward: the gaming cultivation room will be opened, and you will have 1-day access. Task details: this is truly scientific. Your existence is the most unscientific thing. Fang Qi complained silently. That's because your science knowledge is too shallow. Fang Qi was at a loss for words. Tell me about the game cultivation room. You'll know about it after completing the task, the system answered. Fang Qi thought, will you die if you give me some information in advance? The system was silent. Fang Qi was at a loss for words this time for real. Why don't we talk about it at another place? Li Haoran glanced around him and suggested. I'll book a private room in the Wind and Moon Pavilion. Nalan Mingxiu offered immediately. Can guns be produced? Other players felt baffled when they watched the discussion. In short, in some people's minds, guns that originally existed only in Resident Evil began to turn from visual objects to something that could be produced in the real world. The Wind and Moon Pavilion, now that the incident of kicking out customers had passed, nothing had come out of it yet, and no one paid much attention to it for the time being. Resident Evil taught all the players some basic knowledge about modern weapons, but there was more to know. Nalan Mingxiu had studied these weapons, but the result wasn't satisfactory. Although the Blue Flame Pavilion made a handgun, it was fundamentally different from the original weapon since it was still a spiritual artifact with only the aesthetics of a gun. After Lan Yan filled their wine cups, Nalan Mingxiu asked, Mr. Fang, what's your proposal to our partnership? It's simple, my proposal is that we establish a research institute on gun technology with me as the advisor, and you can come to me when you have problems in producing guns, Fang Qi said. From Fang Qi perspective, all he would do was to teach them some related knowledge while they studied the guns. He wasn't so stupid as to teach them how to achieve mass production. After all, he had neither influence nor a team of people to protect and manage the big business. It wasn't wise to let others take this big business opportunity from him. It was why he didn't want to mass produce guns for the time being. Fang Qi only needed them to make guns using the method of making spiritual artifacts. That was his baseline, and they could talk about other things after.